Hello. Oh, we're here. Somebody mentioned me? Doesn't matter. Now, I was going to do what... Yes, I am going to do something, actually. I want to order some groceries for tonight. So I'm going to do that. And I'll just have one, that'll do. Yep. Okay. And that should be me done. Okay. Right. That's me done. Now. Yes, so it is dawn. I'm here in the military aircraft factory. It's the military airfield, that's it. And let's go ahead and, rather than me talking, let's have the Mad God's Amulet. I was about halfway through it.
Hawkmoon, Oladan, perhaps Daverk, the mysterious warrior in jet and gold, Iselda, Count Brass, and a handful of others. For on these the rune staff relied to work its own pattern of destiny.
The High History of Runestone. Chapter 1, The Waiting Warrior.
Know what I mean?
As they neared the bleak crags marking the shore, Hawkmoon glanced curiously at Daverk, who had flung back his boar-mast helm and was staring out to sea, a slight smile on his lips. Daverk seemed to sense Hawkmoon's attention and glanced at him. "You are puzzled, Duke Dorian," he said. "Are you not a little pleased by the outcome of our plan?"
And then
"Aye," Hawkmoon nodded. "But I wondered about you, Daverk. You joined in this venture spontaneously, yet there is no gain in it for you. I'm sure you were not greatly interested in bringing Shaggoth his dessert, and you certainly do not share my desperation in wanting to know Iselda's fate. Also, you have not, to my knowledge, made any attempt to escape." Daverk's smile broadened a little. "Why should I? You do not threaten my life. In fact, you saved my life. At this point, my fortunes seem much closer to yours than the Dark Empire's. But your loyalty is not to me and my cause. My loyalty, my dear Duke, as I have already explained, is to the cause most likely to further my own ambition. I must admit I've changed my views about the hopelessness of your own. You seem endowed with such monstrous good luck. I'm sometimes even inclined to think..."
Quiet a second. Right. I will probably make an announcement if I'm streaming for Linux. Scum is badly optimized, like many games are, for Linux. So even if I was to play it on my main PC, because the other PC does run it, but I have to low detail settings, I can get 40 to 60 frames a second on low detail settings if the other PC runs Windows. If I put Linux on it, it's 5 to 10 frames a second, and that's with like super low, the render, because you can sort of like under render, so instead of rendering 1020p, you can do like 190 by 108 pixels, and then use AI upscaling to make it less fuzzy. Even with that, I was still getting 10 FPS. It was ridiculous. So I'm hoping in the future Scum will do better optimization for Linux, because it's not the only game I play which runs significantly better on Windows than the other. Anyway, back to Hawkmoon.
"Think you might win against the Dark Empire. If that seems possible, I might well join you, and with great enthusiasm. You do not bide your time, perhaps, hoping to reverse our roles again and capture me for your masters." "No denial would convince you," Daverk smiled, "so I will not offer you one." The enigmatic answer set Hawkmoon to frowning again. As if to change the topic of conversation, Daverk suddenly doubled up with a coughing fit and lay down, panting, in the boat. Oladan called out now from the prow, "Duke Dorian, look, on the beach." Hawkmoon peered ahead. Now, under the looming cliffs, he could make out a narrow strip of shingle. A horseman could be seen on the beach, motionless, looking towards them, as if he awaited them with some particular message. The keel of the skiff scraped the shingle of the beach, and Hawkmoon recognized the horseman who waited in the shadow of the cliff. Hawkmoon sprang from the boat and approached him. He was clad from head to foot in plate armour, his helmeted head bowed as if in brooding thought. "Did you know I would be here?" Hawkmoon asked. "It seemed that you might reach in this particular place," replied the warrior in jet and gold, "so I waited." "I see." Hawkmoon looked up at him, uncertain what to do or say next. "I see." Daberk and Olderhan came crunching up the beach towards them. "You know this gentleman?" Daberk asked lightly. "An old acquaintance," Hawkmoon said. "You are Sir Wheelam Daberk," said the warrior in jet and gold sonorously. "I see you still wear the garb of Gran Breton." "It suits my taste," Daberk replied. "I did not hear you introduce yourself." The warrior in jet and gold ignored Daberk, raising a heavy gauntleted hand to point at Hawkmoon. "This is the one I must speak with. You seek your betrothed, Iselda, Duke Dorian, and you quest for the Mad God. Is Iselda a prisoner of the Mad God?" "In a manner of speaking, yes, but you must seek the Mad God for another reason." "Iselda lives. Does she live?" Hawkmoon said insistently. "She lives." The warrior in jet and gold shifted in his saddle. "But you must destroy the Mad God before she can be yours again. You must destroy the Mad God and rip the red amulet from his throat, for the red amulet is rightfully yours. 2 things the Mad God has stolen, and both those things are yours, the girl and the amulet. Iselda is mine, certainly, but I know of no amulet. I have never owned one. This is the red amulet, and it is yours. The Mad God has no right to wear it, and thus it turned him mad." Hawkmoon smiled. "If that is the red amulet's property, then the Mad God is welcome to it." "This is not a matter for humour, Duke Dorian. The red amulet has turned the Mad God mad because he stole it from a servant of the Runestaff. But if the Runestaff's servant wears the red amulet, then he is able to derive great power transmitted from the Runestaff through the amulet. Only a wrongful wearer is turned mad. Only the rightful wearer may regain it once another wears it. Therefore I could not take it from him, nor could any man save Dorian Hawkmoon von Köln, servant of the Runestaff." "Again you call me servant of the Runestaff, yet I know of no duties I must perform, do not even know if this is a fabric of imaginings, and you are some madman yourself. Think what you wish. However, there is no doubt, is there, that you seek the Mad God, that you desire nothing greater than to find him, to find Iselda, his prisoner. If you like, well then, I need not convince you of your mission." Hawkmoon frowned. "There has been a strange series of coincidences since I embarked on the journey from Hamadan. Barely credible. There are no coincidences where the Runestaff is concerned. Sometimes the pattern is noticed, sometimes it is not." The warrior in jet and gold turned in his saddle and pointed to a winding path cut into the cliff side. "We can ascend there, camp and rest above. In the morning we shall begin the journey to the Mad God's castle." "You know where it lies?" Hawkmoon asked eagerly, forgetting his other doubts. "Aye." Then another thought occurred to Hawkmoon. "You did not engineer Iselda's capture to force me to seek the Mad God?" "Iselda was captured by a traitor in her father's army, Juan Ginaga, who planned to take her to Gran Breton. But he was diverted on the way by warriors of the Dark Empire who wished to claim the credit for kidnapping her. While they fought, Iselda escaped and fled, joining at length a refugee caravan through Italia, managing to get passage sometime later on a ship sailing the Adriatic Sea, bound, she was told, ultimately for Provence. But the ship was a slaver running girls to Arabia, and in the Gulf of Sidra was attacked by a pirate vessel from Carpathos.
The Gulf of Sidra?
It is a hard story to believe. What then? Then the Carpathians decided to ransom her, not knowing that the Camargue was under siege, but learning only later of the impossibility of getting money from that quarter. They decided to take her to Istanbul to sell her, but arrived to find the harbour full of Dark Empire ships. Fearing these, they sailed on into the Black Sea, where the ship was attacked by the one you had just burned. I know the rest. That hand I found must have belonged to a pirate who stole Iselda's ring. But it is a wild tale, warrior, and barely has the sound of truth. Coincidence? I told you, there are no coincidences where the rune staff is involved. Sometimes the pattern seems simpler than at other times. Hawkmoon sighed. She is unharmed? Relatively. What do you mean? Wait until you come to the Mad God's castle. Hawkmoon tried to question the warrior in jet and gold further, but the enigmatic man remained entirely silent. He sat on his horse, apparently deep in thought, while Hawkmoon went to help Daberk and Oladan get the nervous horses out of the boat and unload the rest of the provisions they had brought. Hawkmoon found his battered saddlebag still safe, and marvelled at his being able to hold on to it through all their adventures. When they were ready, the warrior in jet and gold silently turned his horse and led the way to the steep cliff path, beginning to climb it without pause. The three companions, however, were forced to dismount and follow after him at a much slower pace. Several times both men and horses stumbled and seemed about to fall, loose stones dropping away beneath their feet to hurtle to the shingle that was now far below them. But at last they gained the top of the cliff and looked over a hilly plain that seemed to stretch away forever. The warrior in jet and gold pointed to the west. In the morning we go that way, to the throbbing bridge. Beyond that lies Ukrainia, and the Mad God's castle lies many days' journey into the interior. Be wary, for Dark Empire troops roam thereabouts. He watched as they made camp. Daberk looked up at him.
Pretty good.
Won't you join us in our meal, sir? He said almost sardonically. But the great helmeted head remained bowed, and both warrior and horse stood stock still like a statue, remaining thus all night, as if watching over them, or possibly watching them to make sure they did not leave on their own. Hawkmoon lay in his tent, looking out at the silhouette of the warrior in jet and gold, wondering if the creature were in any way human, wondering if his interest in Hawkmoon was ultimately friendly or malign. He sighed. He wanted only to find Iselda, save her and take her back to the Camargue, there to satisfy himself that the province still stood against the Dark Empire. But his life was complicated by this strange mystery of the rune staff, and some destiny he must work out that fitted with the rune staff's scheme. Yet the rune staff was a thing, not an intelligence. Or was it an intelligence? It was the greatest power one could call upon when oath-making. It was believed to control all human history. Why then, he wondered, should it need servants, if, in effect, all men served it? But perhaps not all men did. Perhaps there emerged forces from time to time, like the Dark Empire, that were opposed to the Runestaff's scheme for human destiny. Then, perhaps, the Runestaff needed servants. Hawkmoon became confused. His was not these days the head for profundity of that sort, nor speculative philosophy. Not much later, he fell asleep.
Chapter 2, The Mad God's Castle.
For 2 days they rode until they came to the throbbing bridge, which spanned the stretch of sea running between two high cliffs some miles apart. The throbbing bridge was an astonishing sight, for it did not seem made of any kind of solid substance at all, but of a vast number of criss-crossed beams of coloured light that seemed somehow to have been plaited. Gold and shining blue were there, and bright gleaming scarlet and green and pulsing yellow. All the bridge throbbed like some living organ, and below the sea foamed on sharp rocks. "What is it?" Hawkmoon asked the warrior in jet and gold. "Surely no natural thing." "An ancient artifact," said the warrior, "wrought by a forgotten science and a forgotten race, who sprang up sometime between the fall of the death reign and the rise of the princedoms. Who they were and how they were brought into being and died, we do not know. Surely you know.
Put that in there. Oh, I'm getting a phone call. Just a minute, chaps.
The warrior in jet and gold made no reply.
Hello, Chris. How are we?
Alright, toodle pip then. See you, mate. Okay, and we're back in the room.
The light.
I just realised that I have to like mute the the desktop audio, otherwise you'd hear his half of the conversation. So we're back in it. Thanks for your patience.
From the throbbing bridge was reflected on their skins and armour, staining them a variety of hues. The horses began to prance and became difficult to control as they directed them closer to the great bridge of light. Hawkmoon's horse bucked and snorted, and he tightened its reins, forcing it forward. At last its hooves touched the throbbing light of the bridge, and it became calmer as it realized that the bridge would actually bear its weight. The warrior in jet and gold was already crossing the bridge, his whole body seeming to blaze with a multicolored aura, and Hawkmoon too saw the strange light creep around the body of his horse, and then immerse him in a weird radiance. Looking back, he saw Daverk and Oladan shining like beings from another star as they moved slowly over the bridge of throbbing light. Below, faintly seen through the crisscross of beams, were the grey sea and the foam-encircled rocks, and in Hawkmoon's ears there grew a humming sound that was musical and pleasant, yet seemed to set his whole frame vibrating gently in time with the bridge itself. At length they were across, and Hawkmoon felt fresh, as if he had had several days' rest. He mentioned this to the warrior in jet and gold, who said, "Aye, that's another property of the throbbing bridge, I'm told." Then they rode on, with only land now between them and the mad god's lair. On the third day of their journey it had begun to rain, a fine drizzle that chilled them and lowered their spirits. Their horses plodded across the vast, sodden Ukrainian plains, and it seemed that there was no end to the grey world. On the sixth day of their journey, the warrior in jet and gold raised his head and brought his horse to a halt, signalling for the other three to stop. He appeared to be listening. Soon Hawkmoon heard the sound too, the drumming of horses' hooves. Then, breasting a slight rise to their left, came some score of riders in sheepskin hats and cloaks, long spears and sabres on their backs. They seemed in a panic, and not noticing the four onlookers, they rode past at fantastic speed, lashing the rumps of their steeds until blood flew in the air. "What is it?" Hawkmoon called. "What do you flee from?" One of the riders turned in his saddle, not lessening his speed. "Dark Empire army," he called, and dashed on. Hawkmoon frowned. "Should we continue in this direction?" he asked the warrior, "or should we find another route?" "No route is safe," replied the warrior in jet and gold. "We might just as well take this one." Within half an hour they saw smoke in the distance. It was thick, oily smoke that crept close to the ground, and it stank. Hawkmoon knew what the smoke signified, but said nothing until later they came to the town that was burning and saw, piled in the square, a huge pyramid of corpses, every one naked, men, women, children, and animals heaped indiscriminately upon one another and burning. It was this pyre of flesh that gave off the evil-smelling smoke, and there was only one race Hawkmoon knew of who would indulge in such an act as this. The riders had been right. Dark Empire soldiers were nearby. There were signs that a whole battalion of troops had taken the town and razed it. They skirted around the town, for there was nothing they could do, and in even more sober spirits continued on their journey, wary now for any sign of Grand Britannian troops. Oladan, who had not witnessed so many of the Dark Empire's atrocities, was the one most visibly moved by the sight they had witnessed. "Surely," he said, "ordinary mortals could not... They do not regard themselves as ordinary mortals," Daverk said. "They regard themselves as demigods, and their rulers as gods." "It excuses their every immoral action in their eyes," Hawkmoon said. "And besides, they love to wreak destruction, spread terror, torture and kill. Just as in some beasts, like the wolverine, the urge to kill is stronger even than the urge to live, so it is with those of the Dark Empire. The island has bred a race of madmen whose every thought and action is alien to those not born on Gran Bretagne. The depressing drizzle continued to fall as they left the town and its blazing pyramid behind. "It is not far now to the Mad God's castle," said the warrior in jet and gold. By the next morning they had come to a wide, shallow valley and a small lake on which a grey mist moved. Beyond the lake they saw a black, gloomy shape, a building of rough-hewn stone that lay on the far side of the water. About midway between the castle and themselves they could see a collection of rotting hovels clustered on the shore, and a few boats drawn up nearby. Nets had been hung out to dry, but there was no sign of the fishers who used them. The whole day was dark, cold, and oppressive, and there was an ominous atmosphere about lake, village, and castle. The three men followed reluctantly behind the warrior in jet and gold as he made his way around the shore toward the castle. "What of this Mad God's cult?" Oledan whispered. "How many men does he command? And are they as ferocious as those we fought on the ship? Does the warrior underestimate their strength or overestimate our prowess?" Hawkmoon shrugged. His only thought for Iselda. He scanned the great black castle, wondering where she was imprisoned. As they came to the fisher folks' village, they saw why it was so silent. Every last villager had been slain, hacked down by swords or axes. Some of the blades were still buried in the skulls of men and women alike. "The Dark Empire," said Hawkmoon. But the warrior in jet and gold shook his head. Not their work, not their weapons, not their way. "Then what?" murmured Oledan, shivering. "The cult?" The warrior did not answer. Instead he reined in his horse and dismounted, walking heavily toward the nearest corpse. The others dismounted also, looking warily about them. The mist from the lake curled around them like some malign force that sought to trap them. The warrior pointed at the corpse. All these were members of the cult. Some served by fishing to provide the castle with its food. Others lived in the castle itself. Some of these are from the castle. They have been fighting among themselves, Davert suggested.
However,
"In a sense, perhaps," replied the warrior.
"What if?"
"How do you mean?" Hawkmoon began, but then whirled as a chilling shriek came from behind the hovels. All drew their weapons, standing in a hollow circle, prepared for an attack from any side. But when the attack did come, the nature of the attackers caused Hawkmoon to lower his sword momentarily in astonishment. They came running between the houses, swords and axes raised. They were dressed in breastplates and kilts of leather, and a ferocious light burned in their eyes. Their lips were drawn back in bestial snarls, their white teeth gleamed, and foam flecked their mouths. But this was not what astonished Hawkmoon and his companions. It was their sex that caught them by surprise, for all the maniacally shrieking warriors rushing at them were women of incredible beauty. As he slowly recovered his defensive stance, Hawkmoon desperately sought among the faces for that of Iselda, and was relieved that he did not find it. "So this is why the Mad God demanded women be sent to him," Davert gasped. "But why?" "He is a perverse god, I understand," said the warrior in jet and gold, as he brought up his blade to meet the attack of the first warrior woman.
"Do I have any pants?"
Though he defended himself desperately against the blades of the mad-faced women, Hawkmoon found it impossible to counter-attack. They left many openings for his sword, and he could have slain several, but every time he had the opportunity to strike, he held back. And it seemed to be the same with his companions. In a moment's respite he glanced around him, and an idea came. "Retreat slowly," he said to his friends. "Follow me. I've a plan to make this our victory, and a bloodless one." Gradually the four fell back until they were stopped by the poles on which the stout nets of the fishermen had been hung out to dry. Hawkmoon stepped around the first and seized one end of the net, still battling. Oledan guessed his scheme and grabbed the other end. Then Hawkmoon cried, "Now!" and they flung the thing out over the heads of the women. The net settled over most of them, entangling them, but some slashed free and came on. Now Daberk and the warrior in jet and gold understood Hawkmoon's intention, and they too flung a net to trap those who had escaped. Hawkmoon and Oladan hurled a third net over the group they had originally ensnared. Eventually the women were completely trapped in the folds of several strong nets, and the companions were able to approach them gingerly, grabbing at their weapons and gradually disarming them. Hawkmoon panted as he raised a sword and flung it into the lake. Perhaps the mad god is not so insane. Train women to fight, and they'll always have a certain momentary advantage over male soldiers. Doubtless this was part of some larger scheme. You mean his raising money by piracy was to finance a conquering army of women? Oladan said, joining him in hurling weapons into the water, while the struggles of the women subsided behind them. It seems likely, Daberk agreed, watching them work, but why did the women kill the others? That we may find out when we reach the castle, said the warrior in jet and gold. He broke off as part of one of the nets burst, and a howling warrior woman came rushing at them, fingers outstretched like claws. Daberk seized her, encircling her waist with his arms as she kicked and shrieked. Oladan stepped up, reversed his sword and struck her on the base of the skull with the pommel. Much as it offends my sense of chivalry, Daberk said, lowering the prone girl to the ground, I think that you have presented the best scheme for dealing with these pretty murderesses, Oladan. And he crossed to the nets to begin languidly and systematically knocking out the struggling women fighters. At least, he said, we have not killed them, and they have not killed us. An excellent equilibrium. I wonder if they are the only ones, Hawkmoon said broodingly. You're thinking of Yselda, Oladan asked. Aye, I'm thinking of Yselda. Come, Hawkmoon swung into his saddle. Let's to the mad god's castle. He began to gallop rapidly along the beach toward the great black pile. The others were slower in following, struggling behind him. First came Oladan, then the warrior in jet and gold, and finally Wilam Daberk at a leisurely canter, looking for all the world like a carefree youth out for a morning ride. The castle came closer, and Hawkmoon slowed his mad dash, hauling on his horse's reins and bringing it to a skidding halt as they reached the drawbridge. Within the castle all was quiet. A little mist curled about its towers. The drawbridge was down, and on it lay the corpses of the guards. Somewhere from the tops of one of the highest towers, a raven squawked and flapped away over the water of the lake. No sun shone through those grey clouds. It was as if no sun had ever shone here, as if no sun ever would shine. It was as if they had left the world for some limbo, where hopelessness and death prevailed throughout eternity. The dark entrance to the castle courtyard gaped at Hawkmoon. The mist formed grotesque shapes, and there was an oppressive silence everywhere. Hawkmoon took a deep breath of the chill, damp air, drew his blade, kicked at the flanks of his horse, and charged across the drawbridge, leaping the corpses to enter the mad god's lair.
Chapter 3. Hawkmoon's Dilemma.
The great courtyard of the castle was clogged with bodies. Some were of the warrior women, but most were of men wearing the collar of the mad god. Dried blood caked the cobbles not occupied by corpses in grotesque attitudes. Hawkmoon's horse snorted in fear as the stench of decaying flesh filled its nostrils, but he urged it on, dreading that he would see Yselda's face among the dead. He dismounted, turning over stiff bodies of women, peering at them closely, but none was Yselda. The warrior in jet and gold entered the courtyard, Oladan and Daberk behind him. She is not here, said the warrior. She is alive within. Hawkmoon's bleak face rose. His hand trembled as it took the bridle of his horse. Has he done aught to her, warrior? That you must see for yourselves, Sir Champion. The warrior in jet and gold pointed at the castle's main doorway. Through there lies the court of the mad god, A short passage leads to the main hall, and there he sits awaiting you. He knows of me. He knows that one day the red amulet's rightful wearer must arrive to claim what is his. I care nothing for the amulet, only for Iselda. Where is she, warrior? Within. She is within. Go claim your woman and your amulet. Both are important to the Runestaff's scheme. Hawkmoon turned and ran for the doorway, disappearing into the darkness of the castle. The interior of the castle was incredibly chill. Cold water dripped from the roof of the passage, and moss grew on the walls. Blade in hand, Hawkmoon crept along it, half expecting an attack, but none came. He reached a large wooden door, stretching 20 feet above his head, and paused. From behind the door came a strange rumbling sound, a deep-voiced murmuring that seemed to fill the hall beyond. Cautiously, Hawkmoon pushed against the door, and it yielded. He put his head through the gap and peered in upon a bizarre scene. The hall was of strangely distorted proportions. In some parts the ceilings were very low, in others they soared upward for 50 feet. There were no windows, and the light came from brands stuck at random in the walls. In the centre of the hall, on a floor on which 1 or 2 corpses lay, as they had been cut down earlier, was a great chair of black wood, studded with inlaid plaques of brass. In front of this, swinging from a part of the ceiling that was relatively low, was a large cage, such as would be used for a tame bird, save that this was much bigger. In it, Hawkmoon saw huddled a human figure. Otherwise the weird hall was deserted, and Hawkmoon entered, creeping across the floor toward the cage. It was from this, he realized, that the distressed muttering sound was coming, yet it seemed impossible, for the noise was so great. Hawkmoon decided that it was because the sound was amplified by the peculiar acoustics of the hall. He reached the cage and could see the huddled figure only dimly, for the light was poor. "Who are you?" Hawkmoon asked. "A prisoner of the mad god?" The moaning ceased, and the figure stirred. From it then came a deep, echoing, melancholy voice. "Aye, you could say so. The unhappiest prisoner of all." Now Hawkmoon could make out the creature better. It had a long stringy neck, and its body was tall and very thin. Its head was covered in long, straggling grey hair that was matted with filth, and it had a pointed beard, also filthy, that jutted from its chin for about a foot. Its nose was large and aquiline, and its deep-set eyes held the light of a melancholy madness. "Can I save you?" Hawkmoon said. "Can I prize apart the bars?" The figure shrugged. "The door of the cage is not locked. Bars are not my prison. I have been trapped within my groaning skull. Ah, pity me." "Who are you?" "I was once known as Stalnikov, of the great family of Stalnikov." "And the mad god usurped you?" "Aye, usurped me. Aye, exactly." The prisoner in the unlocked cage turned his huge, sad head to stare at Hawkmoon. "Who are you?" "I am Dorian Hawkmoon, Duke of Kurland." "A German?" "Kurland was once part of the country called Germania." "I have a fear of Germans." Stalnikov slid back in the cage, farther away from Hawkmoon. "You need not fear me." "No?" Stalnikov chuckled, and the mad sound filled the hall. "No?" He reached into his jerkin and pulled something forth that was attached to a thong about his neck. The thing glowed with a deep red light, like a huge ruby, illuminated from within, and Hawkmoon saw that it bore the sign of the Runestaff. "No? Then you are not the German who has come to steal my power." Hawkmoon gasped. "The red amulet. How did you obtain it?" "Why," said Stalnikov, rising and grinning horribly at Hawkmoon, "I obtained it 30 years ago from the corpse of a warrior my retainers set upon and slew as he rode this way." He fondled the amulet, and its light struck Hawkmoon in the eyes so that he could barely see. "This is the mad god. This is the source of my madness and my power. This is what imprisons me." "You are the mad god. Where is my Iselda?" Iselda, the girl, the new girl with the blonde hair and the white soft skin? Why do you ask? She is mine. You do not want the amulet? I want Iselda. The mad god laughed, and his laughter filled the hall and reverberated through every cranny of the distorted place. Then you shall have her, German. He clapped his claw-like hands, his whole body moving like a loose-limbed puppet's, the cage swinging wildly. Iselda, my girl, Iselda, come forth to serve your master. From the depths of one part of the hall where the ceiling almost touched the floor, a girl emerged. Hawkmoon saw her outlined, but could not be fully sure it was Iselda. He sheathed his sword and moved forward. Yes, the movements, the stance, they were Iselda's. A smile of relief began to form on his lips as he stretched out his arms to embrace her. Then there came a wild animal shriek, and the girl rushed at him, metal-taloned fingers reaching for his eyes, face distorted with bloodlust, every part of her body enclosed in a garment studded with outward jutting spikes. "Kill him, pretty Iselda," chuckled the mad god. "Kill him, my flower, and we shall reward you with this his offal." Hawkmoon put up his hands to fend off the claws, and the back of one of them was slashed badly. He backed away hastily. "Isolde, no, it is your betrothed, Dorian." But the mad eyes showed no sign of recognition, and the mouth slabbered as the girl slashed again with the talons of metal. Hawkmoon leapt away, pleading with his eyes that she might recognize him. "Iselda!" The mad god chuckled, grasping the bars of his cage and looking on eagerly. "Slay him, my chicken! Rip his throat!" Hawkmoon was almost weeping now as he leapt this way and that to avoid Iselda's gleaming talons. He called to Stalnikov. "What power is it she obeys that conquers her love for me?" "She obeys the power of the mad god, as I obey it," Stalnikov answered. "The red amulet makes all its slaves." Only in the hands of an evil creature. Hawkmoon flung himself aside as Iselda's talons ripped at him. He scrambled up and darted toward the cage. "It turns all who wear it evil," Stalnikov replied, chuckling, as Iselda's claws ripped at Hawkmoon's sleeve. All but a servant of the runestaff." The voice came from the entrance to the hall, and it belonged to the warrior in jet and gold. It was sonorous and grave. "Help me," said Hawkmoon. "I cannot," said the warrior in jet and gold, standing motionless, his huge blade point down on the floor before him, his gauntleted hands resting on the pommel. Now Hawkmoon stumbled and felt Iselda's claws digging into his back. He lifted his hands to grab her wrists and yelled in pain as the spikes sank into his palms. But he managed to free himself of the talons and fling her away and dash for the cage where the mad god gibbered in delight. Hawkmoon leapt for the bars, kicking at Stalnikov as he did so. The cage swung erratically and began to spin. Iselda danced below, trying to reach him with her talons. Stalnikov had withdrawn to the opposite side of the cage, his mad eyes now full of terror, and Hawkmoon managed to drag open the door and fling himself in, pulling it shut behind him. Outside, Iselda howled in frustrated bloodlust, the light from the amulet turning her eyes scarlet. Now Hawkmoon wept openly as he darted a glance at the woman he loved. Then he turned his hate-filled face on the mad god. Stalnikov's deep voice, still mournful, reverberated through the hall. He fingered the amulet, directing its light into Hawkmoon's eyes. "Back, mortal! Obey me! Obey the amulet!" Hawkmoon blinked, feeling suddenly weak. His eyes became fixed on the glowing amulet, and he paused, feeling the power of the thing engulf him. "Now," said Stalnikov, "now you will deliver yourself up to your destroyer." But Hawkmoon rallied all his determination and took a step forward. The mad god's bearded chin dropped in astonishment. "I command you in the name of the red amulet." From the doorway came the sonorous voice of the warrior in jet and gold. "He is the one whom the amulet cannot control, the only one. He is the rightful wearer." Stalnikov trembled and began to edge around the cage as Hawkmoon, still weak, moved determinedly on. "Back!" screamed the mad god. "Leave the cage!" Below, Iselda's taloned fingers had grasped the bars, and she was hauling her metal-studded body up, her eyes still fixed murderously on Hawkmoon's throat. "Back!" This time Stalnikov's voice lost some of its force and confidence. He reached the door of the cage and kicked it open. Iselda, her white teeth bared, her beautiful face twisted in terrifying madness, had hauled herself up now so that she clung to the outside of the cage. The mad god's back was toward her, the red amulet directed still into Hawkmoon's eyes. Iselda's claw darted out, slashing at the back of Stalnikov's head. He screamed and leapt to the floor. Now Iselda saw Hawkmoon again and made to enter the cage. Hawkmoon knew there was no time to try to reason with his maddened betrothed. He gathered all his strength and dived past her slashing claw to land on the uneven flagstones of the floor and lie there for a moment, winded. Painfully he picked himself up as Iselda too leapt groundward. The mad god had scrambled to the great seat opposite the cage, climbing up its back to perch there, the red amulet dangling from his neck, casting its strange light again on Hawkmoon's face. Blood streamed down his shoulders from the wound Iselda's clawed hands had inflicted. Stalnikov gibbered in terror as Hawkmoon reached the seat and climbed up onto its arm. "I beg you, leave me. I'll do you no harm." "You've done me much harm already," Hawkmoon said grimly, drawing his blade. "Much harm, enough to make revenge taste very sweet, mad god." Stalnikov crept as high as he could. He shouted at the girl, "Iselda, stop! Resume your former character. I command you by the power of the red amulet." Hawkmoon turned and saw that Iselda had paused, looking bemused. Her lips parted in horror as she stared at the things on her hands, the metal spikes that covered her body. "What has happened? What has been done to me?" "You were hypnotized by this monster here." Hawkmoon waved his sword in the cringing Stalnikov's direction. "But I will avenge the wrongs he has done you."
All right.
"No!" Stalnikov screamed. "It is not fair." Iselda burst into tears. Stalnikov looked this way and that. "Where are my minions? Where are my warriors?" "You made them destroy one another for your own perverted sport," Hawkmoon told him, "and those not slain we captured." "My army of women, I wanted beauty to conquer all Ukraine. Get me back the Stalnikov inheritance." "That inheritance is here," said Hawkmoon, raising his sword. Stalnikov leapt from the back of the chair and began to run toward the door, but swerved aside as he saw that it was blocked by the warrior in jet and gold. He scuttled into the darkness of the hall, into a cranny where he disappeared from sight. Hawkmoon got down from the chair and turned to look at Iselda, who lay in a heap on the floor, weeping. He went to her and gently removed the blood-stained talons from her slim, soft fingers. She looked up. "Oh, Dorian, how did you find me? Oh, my love!" "Thank the rune staff," said the voice of the warrior in jet and gold. Hawkmoon turned, laughing in relief. "You are persistent in your claims, at least, warrior." The warrior in jet and gold said nothing, but stood like a statue, faceless and tall, by the doorway. Hawkmoon discovered the fastenings of the grim spiked suit and began to strip it off the girl. "Find the mad god," said the warrior. "Remember the red amulet is yours. It will give you power." Hawkmoon frowned. "And turn me mad, perhaps?" "No, fool, it is yours by right." Hawkmoon paused, impressed by the warrior's tone. Iselda touched his hand. "I can do the rest," she said. Hawkmoon hefted his sword and peered into the darkness wherein Stalnikov, the mad god, had disappeared. Stalnikov! Somewhere in the deepest recesses of the hall, a tiny spot of red light gleamed. Hawkmoon ducked his head and entered the alcove. He heard a sobbing sound. It filled his ears. Closer and closer crept Hawkmoon to the source of the red brilliance. Greater and greater became the sound of the strange weeping. Then at last the red glow burned very bright, and by its light he saw the wearer of the amulet, standing against a wall of rough-hewn stone, a sword in his hand. "For 30 years I have waited for you, German," Stalnikov said suddenly, his voice calming. "I knew you must come to ruin my plans, to destroy my ideals, to demolish all I have worked for. Yet I hoped to avert the threat. Perhaps I still can." With a great scream he raised the sword and swung it at Hawkmoon. Hawkmoon blocked the blow easily, turned the blade so that it spun from the mad god's grasp, brought his own sword forward so that it was presented at Stalnikov's heart. For a moment Hawkmoon looked gravely and broodingly at the frightened madman. The light from the red amulet stained both their faces scarlet. Stalnikov cleared his throat as if to plead. Then his shoulders sagged. Hawkmoon drove the point of his blade into the mad god's heart. Then he turned on his heel and left both corpse and red amulet where they lay.
Chapter 4. The Power of the Amulet.
I saw time with Sean.
Hawkmoon drew his cloak about Iselda's naked shoulders. The girl was shivering, sobbing with reaction, mixed with joy at seeing Hawkmoon. Nearby stood the warrior in jet and gold, still motionless. While Hawkmoon embraced Iselda, the warrior began to move, his huge body crossing the hall and entering the darkness where lay the body of Stalnikov, the mad god. "Oh, Dorian, I cannot tell you the horrors I have been through these past months. Captured by this group and that, travelling for hundreds of miles, I do not even know where this hellish place is. I have no memory of recent days, save for a faint remembrance of some nightmare where I struggled with myself against a desire to slay you." Hawkmoon hugged her to him. "A nightmare was all it was. Come, we will leave. We will return to the Camargue in safety. Tell me, what has become of your father and the others?" Her eyes widened. "Did you not know? I had thought you returned there first before coming to seek me. I have heard nothing but rumours. How are Beaugentle, Von Villach, Count Brass?" She lowered her gaze. "Von Villach was killed by a flame lance in a battle with Dark Empire troops on the northern borders. Count Brass, yet to find a man what is it? That can when I last saw him, my father lay on a sick bed, and even Beaugentle's healing powers seemed incapable of raising him to health. It is as if he had lost all feeling, as if he no longer wished to live. He said the Camargue must soon fall. He believed you dead when you did not return in the time necessary to have told him you were safe." Hawkmoon's eyes blazed. "I must get back to the Camargue, if only to give Count Brass the will to again to live. With you gone, he can barely have sustained any kind of energy. If he lives at all," she said softly, not wanting to admit the possibility. "He must live. If the Camargue still stands, then Count Brass lives." From the passage beyond the hall came the sound of running booted feet. Hawkmoon pushed Iselda behind him and again drew his great battle blade. The door was flung open, and Oladan stood there panting, Daberk not far behind. "Dark Empire warriors," Oladan said. "More of them than we could fight. They must be exploring the castle and surrounds for survivors and booty." Daberk pushed past the little beast man. "I tried to reason with them, claimed that I had the right to command them, being of greater rank than their leader, but," he shrugged, "it seems Daberk has no rank in the legions of Gran Bretagne anymore. The damned pilot of the Ornithopter lived long enough to tell a search party of my clumsiness in letting you escape. I am as much an outlaw now as you." Hawkmoon frowned. "Come in, both, and bar that great door. It should hold them if they attack." "Is it the only exit?" Daberk asked, appraising the door. "I think so," Hawkmoon said, "but we must worry about that score later." From the shadows the warrior in jet and gold re-emerged. In one gloved hand the red amulet dangled from its cord. The cord was stained with blood. The warrior handled it gingerly, not touching the stone itself, and stretched it out toward Hawkmoon as Daberk and Oladan hurried to swing the door shut and bar it. "Here," said the warrior in jet and gold, "it is yours." Hawkmoon recoiled. "I do not want it. I will not have it. It is an evil thing. It has caused many to die, others to go mad. Even that poor creature Stalnikov was its victim. Keep it. Find another fool enough to wear it."
"You must wear it," came the voice from the helm. "Only you may wear it." "I will not." Hawkmoon swept out his hand to point to Isolde. "That thing drove this gentle girl to become a slavering, killing beast. All those we saw in the fisher-folk's village, all slain by the power of the red amulet. All those who came against us, turned insane by its power. All those who died in the courtyard, destroyed by the red amulet." He struck the thing from the warrior's hand. "I will not take it. If that is what the rune staff creates, I will have no part of it."
"It is what men, fools like yourself, do with it that makes it corrupt in its influence," the warrior in jet and gold said, his voice still grave and impassive. "It is your duty, as the rune staff's chosen servant, to take the gift. It will not harm you. It will bring you nothing but power. Power to destroy and turn men mad. Power to do good. Power to fight the hordes of the Dark Empire." Hawkmoon sneered. There came a great crash on the door, and he knew that the warriors of Grand Bretagne had found them. "We are outnumbered," said Hawkmoon. "Will the red amulet give us the power to escape them when there is only one way out, through yonder door?" "It will help you," said the warrior in jet and gold, leaning down to retrieve the fallen amulet, again picking it up by its string. The door creaked under the pressure of the blows from those on the other side. "If the red amulet can do so much good," Hawkmoon said, "why do you not touch it yourself?" "It is not mine to touch. It could do to me what it did to the miserable Stalnikov." The warrior moved forward. "Here, take it. It is why you came here." "It is because of Isolde I came here, to rescue her. I have done that." "It is why she came here." "So it was a trick to lure me." "No, it was part of the pattern. But you say you came to save her, and yet you refuse the means of escaping with her safely from this castle. Once those warriors break in, a score or more of fierce fighters, they will destroy you all, and Isolde's fate might be worse than yours." Now the door was splitting. Oledan and Daverk backed away, swords ready, a look of quiet desperation in their eyes. "Another moment and they will be in here," said Daverk. "Farewell, Oledan, and you too, Hawkmoon. You were less boring companions than some." Hawkmoon eyed the amulet. "I do not know." "Trust my word," said the warrior in jet and gold. "I have saved you in the past. Would I have done so merely to destroy you now? Destroy me, no. But this will deliver me into some evil power. How do I know you are a messenger from the rune staff? I have only your word that I serve it, and not some darker cause." "The door is breaking down," Oledan yelled. "Duke Dorian, we'll need your aid. Let the warrior escape with Isolde if he can." "Quick," said the warrior, extending the amulet again to Hawkmoon. "Take it and save the maid at least." For an instant Hawkmoon hesitated. Then he accepted the thing. It settled into his hand like a pet in the hand of its master, but an exceedingly powerful pet. Its red light grew in intensity until it flooded the great, grotesquely proportioned chamber. Hawkmoon felt the power surge into him. His whole body became full of a great sense of well-being. When he moved, it was with great speed. His brain seemed no longer clouded by the events of the past day. He smiled and placed the blood-stained thong about his neck, bent to kiss Isolde once, and felt a delicious sensation run through him, turned, sword ready, to face the howling horde that had by now all but demolished the great door. Then the door fell inward, and there stood crouched the panting beasts of Grand Bretagne, tiger masks gleaming with enamelled metal and semi-precious jewels, weapons poised to butcher the pathetic-seeming little group that awaited them. The leader stepped forward. "So much exercise for so few. Brothers, we'll make them pay for our efforts." And then the killing began.
Chapter 5. The Slaughter in the Hall.
Oh, by the rune staff, murmured Hawkmoon thickly, the power in me. Then he sprang forward, great battle blade howling through the air to snap the enmetalled neck of the leading warrior, slash backhanded at the man to his left and send him reeling, swing around and cut through the armour of the man to his right. Suddenly there were blood and twisted metal everywhere. The light from the amulet spread scarlet shadows across the masked faces of the warriors as Hawkmoon led his comrades forward in an attack, the last thing the Dark Empire's soldiers had expected. But the amulet's light dazzled them, and they lifted armour-clumsy arms to shield their eyes, weapons held defensively, bewildered by the speed with which Hawkmoon, Oledan and the Berk moved against them. Following the other three came the warrior in jet and gold, his own huge broadsword whistling in the circle of steel death, all his movements apparently effortless. There was a clattering and a shouting from the men of Gran Breton as, with Iselda behind them at all times, the four drove them into the hall. Hawkmoon was attacked by some 6 swearing axemen who tried to press in against him and stop him from wielding his deadly sword. But the young Duke of Curland kicked out at one, elbowed another aside, and brought his blade straight down into the mask helmet of another, splitting both helm and skull, so that brains oozed through the fissures when he tugged his sword free. The sword rapidly became blunted with so much work, until at last he was using it more as an axe than anything else. He wrenched a fresh sword from the hand of one of his attackers, but kept his own. With the new sword he thrust, with the old he hacked. "Ah," whispered Hawkmoon, "the red amulet is worth its price." It swung at his neck, turning his sweating, vengeful face into a red demon's mask. Now the last of the warriors tried to flee for the door, but the warrior in jet and gold and Daverk blocked them, hacking them down as they tried to burst past. Somewhere Hawkmoon caught a glimpse of Iselda. Her face was buried in her hands as she refused to witness the red ruin Hawkmoon and his friends had created. "Oh, it is sweet to slay these carrion," Hawkmoon said. "Iselda, this is our triumph." But the girl did not look up. In many parts of the hall the floors were heaped with the twisted corpses of the slaughtered. Hawkmoon panted, seeking more to slay, but there were none left. He dropped the borrowed blade, sheathed his own, the battle lust leaving him completely. He frowned down at the red amulet, raising it up to regard it more closely, studying the simple motif of a rune-carved staff. "So," he murmured, "your first help is in aiding me to kill. I'm grateful, but I wonder still if you're not a force more for evil than for good." The light from the amulet flickered and began to fade. Hawkmoon looked up at the warrior in jet and gold. "The amulet's dulled. What means that?" "Nothing," said the warrior. "It draws its power from a great distance off and cannot sustain it at all times. It will grow bright again eventually." He paused, cocking his head toward the passage. "I hear more footsteps. The warriors were not the whole force." "Then let us go to meet them," Daverk said with a low bow, waving Hawkmoon before him. "After you, my friend. You seem best equipped to be first." "No," said the warrior. "I will go. The amulet's power has faded for the while. Come." Warily they passed through the smashed door, Hawkmoon last with Iselda. She looked up at him then, her eyes steady. "I am glad you killed them," she said, "though I hate to see death come so gracelessly." "They live without grace," Hawkmoon said softly, "and they deserve to die without grace. It is the only way to treat those who serve the Dark Empire. Now we must face more of them. Be brave, my love, for we encounter our greatest danger." Ahead, the warrior in jet and gold had already engaged the first of the fresh force of fighters, and was flinging the weight of his great metal-encased body against them, so that they stumbled back in the narrow confines of the passage, unnerved as much as anything, because not one of their opponents seemed hurt by them, and because some 25 of their comrades appeared to have met their death within. The Dark Empire soldiers broke out into the corpse-strewn courtyard, shouting and trying to rally themselves. All four who came against them were covered in partly dried blood and brains, and made a terrifying sight as they entered the daylight. The grey rain was still falling, and the air was still chill, but it revived Hawkmoon and the others, and their recent victory had made them feel invincible. Hawkmoon, Daverk, and Oladan grinned like wolves at their foes, grinned with such complacency too that the Dark Empire warriors hesitated before attacking, though they greatly outnumbered Hawkmoon and his companions. The warrior in jet and gold raised a pointing finger to the drawbridge. "Begone," he said in deep, grave tones, "or we shall destroy you as we destroyed your brothers." Hawkmoon wondered if the warrior were bluffing, or if that mysterious entity honestly believed they could beat so many without the power of the red amulet to aid them. But before he could decide, another group of warriors came rushing over the drawbridge. They had retrieved weapons from the hands and bodies of corpses, and they were enraged. The Mad God's warrior women had escaped from the nets. "Show them the amulet," the warrior in jet and gold whispered to Hawkmoon. "That is what they are used to obeying. It is that which bemused them in the first place, not the Mad God." "But its light has faded," Hawkmoon protested. "No matter. Show them the amulet." Hawkmoon swept the red amulet from his neck and held it up before the howling women. "Stay, in the name of the red amulet.
Hey,
I command you to not attack us. But these," and he pointed at the wavering Dark Empire warriors. "Come, I will lead you."
Hey,
Hawkmoon sprang forward, his blunted sword sweeping out to slash the foremost warrior and slay him before he realized it.
Know what I mean?
The women easily outnumbered the Dark Empire force, and they worked with a will at their destruction, so well that Daverk called, "Let them finish, we can escape now." Hawkmoon shrugged. "This is surely but one pack of Dark Empire hounds. There must be many more about, for it's not their way to spread too far from the mass of their brothers." "Follow me," said the warrior in jet and gold. "Time, I think, to unloose the Mad God's beasts."
Chapter 6. The Mad God's Beasts.
The warrior in jet and gold led them to a section of the courtyard where a pair of great iron trapdoors had been let into the cobblestones. They were forced to drag aside corpses before they could grasp the huge brass rings and heave the doors back. The doors clanged on the stones to reveal a long stone ramp that led down into gloom. From within came a warm smell that was at once familiar and unfamiliar to Hawkmoon, and made him hesitate at the top of the ramp, for he was not sure that the scent meant danger. "Do not be afraid," said the warrior firmly. "Proceed. There lies your method of escaping this place." Slowly Hawkmoon began to descend, the others following him. The light, coming thinly from above, showed him a long room with a large object at the far end. He could not decide what it was, and was about to investigate it, when the warrior in jet and gold said from behind him, "Not now. First the beasts. They are in their stalls." Hawkmoon realized that the long room was in fact some sort of stable, with stalls on either side. From some of them came stirring sounds and animal grunts, and all at once a door shuddered as a huge bulk was flung against it. "Not horses," said Oladan, "nor bullocks. To me, Duke Dorian, they have the smell of cats." "Aye, that's so," Hawkmoon nodded, fingering the pommel of his sword. "Cats, that's the scent. How can cats aid our escape?" Daverk had taken a brand from the wall and was striking a flint to ignite his tinder. Shortly the brand flamed, and Hawkmoon saw that the object at the far end of the stable was a vast chariot, large enough to accommodate more than their number. Its double shafts had space for 4 animals. "Open the stalls," said the warrior in jet and gold, "and harness the cats to the yokes." Hawkmoon wheeled. "Harness cats to the chariot? Certainly a whim fit for a mad god, but we are sane mortals, warrior. Besides, those cats are wild by the sound of their movements. If we open the stalls, they're bound to fall upon us." As if in confirmation, there came a great yowling roar from one of the stalls, and this was taken up by the other beasts until the stables echoed with the bestial din, and it was impossible to make oneself heard over it. When it had begun to subside, Hawkmoon shrugged and stepped toward the ramp. "We'll find horses above and take our chances with more familiar steeds than these." "Have you not yet learned to trust my wisdom?" said the warrior. "Did I not speak truth about the red amulet and the rest?" "I have still to test that truth fully," Hawkmoon said. "Those mad women obeyed the power of the amulet, did they not?" "They did," Hawkmoon agreed. "The mad god beasts are trained, likewise, to obey he who is master of the red amulet. What would I gain, Dorian Hawkmoon, from lying to you?" Hawkmoon shrugged. "I have grown suspicious of all since I first encountered the Dark Empire. I do not know if you have anything to gain or not. However," he walked towards the nearest stall and laid his hands on the heavy wooden bar, "I'm tired of bickering and will test your assurances." As he flung off the bar, the stable door was swept back from within by a giant paw. Then a head emerged, larger than an ox's, fiercer than a tiger's, a snarling cat's head with slanting yellow eyes and long yellow fangs. As it padded out, a deep growling sound coming from its belly, its glaring eyes regarding them calculatingly, they saw that its back was lined with a row of foot-high spines of the same colour and appearance as its fangs, running down to the base of its tail, which, unlike that of an ordinary cat, was tipped with barbs. "A legend come to life," gasped Daberg, losing his detached manner for a moment. "One of the mutant war jaguars of Asia Communista. An old bestiary I saw pictured them, said that if they had existed at all, then it was 1,000 years ago, but that because they were the products of some perverted biological experiment they could not breed." "So they cannot," said the warrior in jet and gold, "but their lifespan is all but infinite." The huge head now swung toward Hawkmoon, and the barbed tail swished back and forth, the eyes fixing on the amulet at Hawkmoon's throat. "Tell it to lie down," said the warrior. "Lie down," commanded Hawkmoon, and almost at once the beast settled to the floor, its mouth closing, its eyes losing some of their fierceness. Hawkmoon smiled. "I apologize, warrior. Very well, let's loose the other three. Oladan, Daberg." His friends went forward to take out the bars of the remaining stalls, and Hawkmoon put his arm around Iselda's shoulders. "That chariot," he said, "will bear us home, my love." Then he remembered something. "Warrior, my saddlebags, still on my horse, unless those dogs have stolen them." "Wait here," said the warrior, turning and beginning to ascend the ramp. "I will look." "I will look myself," Hawkmoon said. "I know that—" "No," said the warrior. "I will go." Hawkmoon felt a vague suspicion. Why? "Only you, with the amulet, have the power of controlling the mad god beasts. If you were not here, they could turn on the others and destroy them." Reluctantly, Hawkmoon stepped back and watched the warrior in jet and gold move with heavy purposefulness to the top of the ramp and disappear. Out of their stalls now prowled 3 more horned cats, similar to the first. Oladan cleared his throat nervously. "Best remind them that it is you they obey," he said to Hawkmoon. "Lie down," Hawkmoon commanded, and slowly the beasts did as he commanded. He went up to the nearest and laid a hand on its thick neck, feeling the wiry, bristling fur, the hard muscle beneath it. The beasts were the height of horses, but considerably bulkier and infinitely more deadly. They had not been bred to pull carriages, that was plain, but to kill in battle. "Move that chariot up," he said, "and let's harness these creatures." Daberg and Oladan dragged the chariot forward. It was of black brass and green gold, and smelled of antiquity. Only the leather of the yokes was relatively new. They slipped the harness over the heads and shoulders of the beasts, and the mutant jaguars hardly moved, save for flattening their ears occasionally when the men tightened the straps too rapidly. When all was ready, Hawkmoon signed to Iselda to enter the chariot. "We must wait for the warrior to return," he said. "Then we may set off." "Where is he?" Daverk asked. "Gone to find my gear," Hawkmoon explained. Daverk shrugged and lowered his great helm over his face. "It is taking him long enough. I, for one, will be glad when we leave this place behind. It stinks of death and evil." Oladan pointed upward, at the same time drawing his sword. "Is that what you smelled, Daverk?" At the top of the ramp stood 6 or 7 more Dark Empire warriors of the Order of the Weasel, their long snouted masks seeming to tremble in anticipation of killing the men below. "Into the chariot, quick!" Hawkmoon ordered as the weasels descended. In the front of the chariot was a raised block on which the driver could stand, and beside it, in a rack once used for javelins, a long-handled whip. Hawkmoon sprang onto the block, seized the whip and cracked it over the heads of the beasts. "Up, beauties, up!" The cats climbed to their feet. "And now forward!" The chariot jumped forward with a great lurch as the powerful animals dragged it up the ramp. The weasel-masked warriors screamed as the gigantic horned cats raced toward them. Some leapt from the ramp, but most were too late and went down screaming, crushed by clawed feet and iron-rimmed wheels. Out into the grey daylight the bizarre chariot broke, scattering more weasel warriors come to investigate the open trapdoors. "Where is the warrior?" Hawkmoon cried above the din of howling men. "Where are my saddlebags?" But the warrior in jet and gold was nowhere to be seen, and neither could they locate Hawkmoon's horse. Now Dark Empire swordsmen hurled themselves against the chariot, and Hawkmoon lashed out at them with his whip, while behind him Oladan and Daverk held them back with their own blades. "Drive through the gate," Daverk cried. "Hurry, at any moment they'll overwhelm us." "Where is the warrior?" Hawkmoon looked wildly about him. "Doubtless he awaits us outside," Daverk shouted desperately. "Drive, Duke Dorian, or we are doomed." Suddenly Hawkmoon saw his horse over the heads of the million warriors. It had been stripped of its saddlebags, and he had no way of knowing who had taken them. In panic he shouted again, "Where is the warrior in jet and gold? I must find him. The contents of those saddlebags could mean life or death for the Camargue." Oladan gripped his shoulder and said urgently, "And if you do not drive us from this place, it means our deaths, and may be worse for Iselda." Hawkmoon was nearly out of his mind with indecision, but then, as Oladan's words at last entered his consciousness, he gave a great yell and whipped up the beasts, sending them springing through the gate and across the drawbridge, to gallop along the lakeside with what seemed like all the hordes of Gran Bretagne behind them. Moving far more rapidly than horses could move, the mad god's beasts dragged the bouncing chariot over the ground and away from the dark castle and the mist-covered lake, away from the village of hovels and the place of corpses, into the foothills beyond the lake, down a muddy road that led between gloomy cliffs and onto the wide plains again. There the road petered out and the ground became soft, but the mutant jaguars had no effort in crossing it. "If I have a complaint," remarked Daverk, as he clung for dear life to the side of the chariot and was bounced about horribly, "it is that we are moving a trifle too rapidly." Oladan tried to grin through gritted teeth. He was crouched in the bottom of the vehicle, holding Iselda and trying to protect her from the worst of the bumps. Hawkmoon made no response. He clenched the reins tight in his hands and did not reduce the speed of their flight. His face was pale and his eyes blazed with anger, for he was sure that he had been duped by the man who claimed to be his chief ally against the Dark Empire, duped by the apparently incorruptible warrior in jet and gold.
Chapter 7. Encounter in a Tavern.
"Hawkmoon, stop, for the rune stuff's sake. Stop, man. Are you possessed?" Davert, more troubled than anyone had ever seen him, tugged at Hawkmoon's sleeve as the man lashed at the panting beasts. The chariot had been moving for hours now, had splashed across 2 rivers without stopping, and was now tearing through a forest as night fell. At any moment it might strike a tree and kill them all. Even the powerful horned cats were tiring, but Hawkmoon mercilessly lashed them on. "Hawkmoon, you are mad." "I am betrayed," answered Hawkmoon. "Betrayed. I had the salvation of the Camargue in those saddlebags, and the warrior in jet and gold stole them. He tricked me, gave me a trinket with limited powers in exchange for a machine with powers that were unlimited for my purposes. On, beasts, on!" "Dorian, listen to him. You will kill us all," Iselda spoke tearfully. "You will kill yourself, and then how will you aid Count Brass and the Camargue?" The chariot leapt into the air and came down with a crash. No normal vehicle could have stood such a shock, and it jarred the passengers to their bones. "Dorian, you have gone mad. The warrior would not betray us. He has helped us. Perhaps he was overwhelmed by Dark Empire men, the saddlebags stolen from him. No, I sensed some betrayal when he left the stables. He has gone, my gift from Rheinald with him." But Hawkmoon's rage and bafflement were beginning to pass, and he no longer whipped the flanks of the straining beasts. Gradually, the pace of the chariot slowed as the tired beasts, free from the whip, gave in to their instinct to rest. Davert took the reins from Hawkmoon's hands, and the young warrior did not resist, merely sank to the bottom of the chariot and buried his head in his hands. Davert brought the beasts to a halt, and they fell at once to the ground, panting noisily. Iselda stroked Hawkmoon's hair. "Dorian, all the Camargue needs is you to save it. I do not know what this other thing was, but I am sure we have no use for it. And you have the red amulet. That will be of some use, surely." It was night now, and moonlight fell through a lattice of tree branches. Davert and Oladan dismounted from the chariot, rubbing their bruised bodies, and went off to look for wood for a fire.
"You get
Hawkmoon looked up. The light from the moon struck his pale face, and the black jewel embedded in his forehead. He regarded Iselda with melancholy eyes, though his lips tried to smile. "I thank you, Iselda, for your faith in me, but I fear it will need more than Dorian Hawkmoon to win the fight against all Gran Bretagne, and the warrior's perfidy has made me despair the more." "There is no proof of perfidy, my dear. No, but I knew instinctively that he planned to leave us, taking the machine with him. He sensed my knowledge too. I do not doubt he has it, and is far away by now. I do not necessarily suspect that he takes it for an ignoble purpose. Possibly his purpose is of greater importance than mine, yet I cannot excuse his actions. He deceived me. He betrayed me. If he served the Runestaff, he may know more than you. He may wish to preserve this thing, may think it dangerous to you. I have no proof he serves the Runestaff. For all I know, he may serve the Dark Empire, and I am their tool. You have become over-suspicious, my love." "I have been forced to become so," Hawkmoon sighed. "I will be so until Gran Bretagne is defeated or I am destroyed." And he held her close to him, burying his weary head in her bosom, and slept that way all night. In the morning the sun was bright, though the air cold. Hawkmoon's gloomy spirits had departed with the deep sleep, and they all appeared in a better mood. All were ravenous, including the mutant beasts, whose tongues lolled, and whose eyes were greedy and fierce. Oladan had fashioned himself a bow and some arrows early, and he had gone off into the deeper reaches of the forest to seek game. Davert coughed theatrically as he polished his huge boar helm with a piece of cloth he had found in the bottom of the chariot. "This western air does not do my weak lungs any good," he said. "I would rather be in the east again, perhaps in Asia Communista, where I have heard a noble civilization exists. Perhaps such a civilization would appreciate my talents, elevate me to some high estate." You have given up hope of any reward from the King Emperor? Hawkmoon asked with a grin. The reward I'll get is the same he's promised you, Daverk said mournfully. If that damned pilot had not lived, and then my being seen fighting with you at the castle. No, friend Hawkmoon, I'm afraid my ambitions as far as Gran Bretagne go are now seen to be somewhat unrealistic. Oladan appeared, staggering under the weight of 2 deer, one on each shoulder. They jumped up to help him. 2 with 2 shots, he said proudly, and the arrows were hastily made at that. We cannot eat all of one, let alone 2, Daverk said. The beasts, Oladan said, they need feeding, or I'll warrant red amulet or no red amulet. They'll feed on us before the day's done. They quartered the larger deer and flung it to the mutant cats, who gulped the meat down swiftly, growling softly. Then they set about making a spit on which to roast the second animal. When they were eating at last, Hawkmoon sighed and smiled. They say that good food banishes all care, he said, but I had not believed it until now. I feel a new man. That is the first good meal I have eaten in months. Fresh-killed venison eaten in the woods. Ah, the pleasure of it. Daverk, who was wiping his fingers fastidiously and had eaten delicately an enormous amount of meat, said, I admire health such as yours, Hawkmoon. I wish I had your hearty appetite. And I wish I had yours, said Oladan, laughing, for you've eaten enough to last you a week. Daverk looked at him reproachfully. Iselda, who was still wrapped only in Hawkmoon's cloak, shivered a little and put down the bone on which she had been chewing. I wonder, said she, if we could seek out a town as soon as possible. There are things I would purchase. Hawkmoon looked embarrassed. Of course, Iselda, my dear, though it will be difficult. If Dark Empire warriors are thick in these parts, it would be better to drive on farther north and west toward the Camargue. Perhaps in Carpathia a town can be found. We must be almost upon her borders now. Daverk pointed his thumb to the chariot and the beasts. We get a poor reception arriving at a town in that unearthly thing, he said. Perhaps if one of us went into the nearest settlement. But then, what would you use for money? I have the red amulet, Hawkmoon said. It could be traded. Fool, said Daverk, suddenly deadly serious and glaring at him. That amulet is your life and ours, our only protection, the only means of controlling our beasts there. It seems to me that it is not the amulet you hate, but the responsibility it implies. Hawkmoon shrugged. Maybe. Perhaps I was a fool to suggest it. Still, I like not the thing. I saw what you did not. I saw what it had done to a man who had worn it 30 years. Oladan interrupted. There is no need for this dispute, friends, for I anticipated our need, and while you, with great ferocity, were finishing off our foes in the Mad God's Hall, Duke Dorian, I dug a few eyes from the Dark Empire men. Eyes? Hawkmoon said in revulsion, then relaxed and smiled as he saw Oladan holding up a handful of jewels he had prized from Gran Bretannian's masks. Well, said Daverk, we need provisions desperately, and the Lady Iselda needs some clothing. Who stand least chance attracting attention if he goes into a town when we get to Carpathia? Hawkmoon gave him a sardonic glance. Why, you, of course, Sir William, without your Dark Empire accessories. For I, as I'm sure you would have pointed out, have this damned black jewel to label me, and Oladan has his furry face. But you are still my prisoner. I am aggrieved, Duke Dorian. I thought as allies, united against a common enemy, united by blood, by saving each other's lives. You have not saved mine, as I recall. Not specifically, I suppose, still. And I am not disposed to give you a handful of jewels and set you free, Hawkmoon continued, adding in a more sombre tone, besides, I'm not in a trusting mood today. You would have my word, Duke Dorian, Daverk said lightly, though his eyes seemed to harden slightly. Hawkmoon frowned. He has proved himself our friend in several fights, Oladan said softly. Hawkmoon sighed. Forgive me, Daberg. Very well, when we reach Carpathia, you will buy us what we need. Daberg began to cough. This damnable air, it will be the death of me. They rode on, the horned cats loping at a more gentle pace than the previous days, but still making faster speed than any horse. They left the great forest by midday, and by evening saw in the distance the mountains of Carpathia, at the same time as Iselda pointed north, indicating the tiny figures of riders approaching them. "They've seen us," Oladan said, "and seem to be planning to ride at an angle to cut us off." Hawkmoon flicked his whip over the flanks of the huge beasts drawing the chariot. "Faster!" he shouted, and almost at once the chariot began to gather speed. A little later, Daberg called above the rumble and rattle of the wheels. "They're Dark Empire riders, no doubt of that. Order of the Walrus, if I'm not mistaken." "The King Emperor must be planning a serious invasion of Ukraine," Hawkmoon said. "There's no other reason for so many bands of Dark Empire warriors here. That means he has almost certainly consolidated all conquests farther west and south." "Save for the Camargue, I hope," said Iselda. The race continued, with the horsemen gradually drawing nearer, riding as they were at an angle to the chariot's course. Hawkmoon smiled grimly, letting the others think they were catching them. "Ready with your bow, Oladan," he said. "Here is an opportunity for target practice." As the horsemen, in grotesque, grinning walrus masks of ebony and ivory, drew close, Oladan knocked an arrow to string and let fly. A rider fell, and a few javelins hurtled toward the chariot, but dropped short. 3 more members of the Walrus Order died from Oladan's arrows before they were outdistanced, and the jaguars were hauling their burden into the first foothills of the Carpathian Mountains. Within 2 hours it was dark, and they decided it was safe to camp. 3 days later they contemplated the rocky side of a mountain, and knew that they would have to abandon both beasts and chariot if they were to cross the range at all. They would have to travel on foot. There was no alternative. The terrain had become increasingly difficult for the mutant jaguars, and the mountainside ahead was impossible for them to climb, dragging the chariot. They had tried to find a pass, had wasted 2 days looking for one, but there was none. Meanwhile, if they were pursued, their pursuers would be almost upon them by now. There was no doubt in their minds that Hawkmoon had been recognized as the man whom the King Emperor Huon had sworn to destroy. Therefore, Dark Empire warriors, interested in elevating themselves in the eyes of their master, would be eager to see him out. So they began to climb, stumbling up the steep face of the mountain, leaving the unharnessed beasts behind them. When they were nearing a ledge that seemed to extend for some distance around the mountain and offer a relatively easy path, they heard a rattle of weapons and hoofs, and saw the same walrus-masked riders who had pursued them on the plain come riding from behind some rocks below. "Their javelins are bound to get us at this range," Daberg said grimly, "and there's no cover." But Hawkmoon smiled thinly. "There is still one thing," he said, and raised his voice. "At them, my beasts! Kill them, my cats! Obey me in the name of the amulet!" The mutant cats turned their baleful eyes on the newcomers, who were so jubilant at seeing their victims exposed that they hardly noticed the horned jaguars. The leader raised his javelin, and the cats leapt. Iselda did not look back as the terrified screams filled the air and the blood-curdling snarls echoed through the quiet mountains as the mad god's beasts first killed and then fed. By the next day they had crossed the mountains and come to a green valley with a little red town that was very peaceful. Daberg looked down at the town and held out his hand to Oladan. "The jewels, if you please, friend Oladan. By the rune staff, I feel naked in just shirt and breeches." He took the jewels, tossed them in his palm, winked at Hawkmoon, and set off for the village. They lay in the grass and watched him walk down whistling and enter the street. Then he disappeared. They waited for 4 hours. Hawkmoon's face began to grow grim, and he glanced resentfully at Oladan, who pursed his lips and shrugged. And then Daverk reappeared, but he had others with him. With a shock, Hawkmoon realized they were Dark Empire troops, men of the feared Order of the Wolf, Baron Meliadus's old order. Had they recognized Daverk and captured him? But no, on the contrary, Daverk seemed quite friendly with them. He waved, turned on his heel, and began to walk up the hill to where they were hidden, a large bundle on his back. Hawkmoon was puzzled, for the wolf masks had gone back into the village, allowing Daverk to go free. "He can talk, can Daverk," grinned Oladan. "He must have convinced them he was an innocent traveller. Doubtless the Dark Empire is still using the soft approach in Carpathia." "Perhaps," said Hawkmoon, not entirely convinced. When Daverk came back, he flung down his bundle and pulled it open, displaying several shirts and a pair of breeches, as well as a number of different foodstuffs, cheeses, bread, sausages, cold meat, and the like. He handed back most of Oladan's jewels to him. "I purchased them relatively cheaply," he said, then frowned as he saw Hawkmoon's expression. "What is it, Duke Dorian? Not satisfied? I could not get the Lady Iselda a gown, I regret, but the breeches and shirt should fit her." "Dark Empire men," said Hawkmoon, jerking his thumb at the village. "You seem very friendly with them." "I was worried, I'll admit," Daverk said, "but they seem to be cautious of violence. They are in Carpathia to tell the folk of the benefits of Dark Empire rule. Apparently the King of Carpathia is entertaining one of their nobles. The usual technique, gold before violence. They asked me a few questions, but were not unduly suspicious. They say they are warring in Shekia, have almost subdued that nation, but for a key city or two. "You did not mention us," Hawkmoon said. "Of course not." Half satisfied, Hawkmoon relaxed a little. Daverk picked up the cloth in which he wrapped his bundle. "Look, 4 cloaks with hoods, such as the holy men in these parts wear. They'll hide our faces well enough. I heard there's a larger town about a day's walk further south. It's a town where they trade horses. We can get there by tomorrow and buy steeds. Is it a good idea?" Hawkmoon nodded slowly. "Aye, we need horses." The town was called Zorvanemi, and it bustled with folk of all sorts come to sell and to buy horses. Just outside the main town were the stockyards, and here were many kinds of horseflesh, from thoroughbreds to plough horses. They arrived too late in the evening to buy, and they put up at an inn on the edge of town, close to the stockyards, so that they could buy what they wanted and be away early in the morning. Here and there they saw small groups of Dark Empire soldiers, but the soldiers paid no attention to the cowled holy men who mingled with the crowd. But there were several deputations from different monasteries in the area, and one more went unnoticed. In the warmth of the inn's public room they ordered hot wine and food, and consulted a map they had bought, speaking softly, discussing their best routes through to southern France. A little later the door of the inn was pushed open, and the cold night air swept in. Over the sounds of conversation and occasional laughter they heard the coarse tones of a man yelling for wine for himself and his comrades, and suggesting to the landlord that girls should be found for them as well. Hawkmoon glanced up and was instantly on his guard. The men who had entered were soldiers in the Order of the Boar, the order that Daverk had belonged to. With their squat armoured bodies and heavy helmet masks, they looked, in the half-light, exactly like the animals they represented, as if so many boars had learned to talk and walk on their hind legs. The landlord was plainly nervous, clearing his throat several times and asking them what wine they preferred. "Strong wine, plentiful wine," shouted the leader. "And the same goes for the women. Where are your women? I hope they're lovelier than your horses. Come, man, be quick. We've spent all day buying horseflesh and helping this town's prosperity. Now you'll do us a favour. The Boer warriors were evidently here to buy steeds for the Dark Empire troops, probably those bent on conquering Shekaya, which lay just across the border. Hawkmoon, Yselda, Oladan and Daverk drew their cowls surreptitiously about their heads and sipped at their wine without looking up. There were 3 serving wenches in the public room, as well as 2 men and the landlord himself. As one passed, the Boer warrior grabbed her and pressed the snout of his mask against her cheek. "Give an old pig a kiss, little girl," he roared. She wriggled and tried to get free, but he held her tight. Now there was silence everywhere else in the tavern and tension. "Come outside with me," the Boer leader continued. "I'm in a rutting mood." "Oh no, please let me go," the girl sobbed. "I'm to be married next week." "Married, eh?" guffawed the warrior. "Well, let me teach you a thing or two for you to teach your husband." The girl screamed and continued to resist. No one else in the tavern moved. "Come on," the warrior said hoarsely, "outside." "I won't," wept the girl. "I won't until I'm married." "Is that all?" The Boer-masked man laughed. "Well then, I'll marry you if that's what you want." He turned suddenly and glared at the 4 who sat in the shadows. "You're holy men, aren't you? One of you can marry us." And before Hawkmoon and the rest had realized what was happening, he had grabbed Yselda, who sat on the outside of the bench, and hauled her to her feet. "Marry us, holy man, or—" "By the rune staff, what sort of a holy man are you?" Yselda's cowl had fallen back, revealing her lovely hair. Hawkmoon stood up. There was nothing for it now but to fight. Oladan and Daverk stood up. As one they drew the swords hidden under their robes. As one they launched themselves at the armoured warriors, yelling for the women to flee. The Boer warriors were drunk and surprised, and the 3 companions were neither. It was their only advantage. Hawkmoon's blade slipped between breastplate and gorget of the leader and killed him before he could draw his own sword, while Oladan's swipe to another's barely protected legs hamstrung him. Daverk managed to slice off the hand of one who had stripped off his gauntlets. Now they fought back and forth across the tavern floor as men and women made hastily for the stairs and doors, many to crowd to the gallery above to watch. Oladan, forsaking normal swordplay in the narrow room, had leapt onto the back of a huge opponent, and dirk in hand was trying to stab him through the eye holes of his mask, while the man clumsily tried to dislodge him, staggering about half-blind. Daverk was fencing with a swordsman of some skill, who was driving him back steadily toward the stairs, while the Hawkmoon was desperately defending himself against a man with a huge axe, that, every time it missed him, chopped chunks out of the woodwork. Hawkmoon, hampered by his cloak, was trying to get out of it, and at the same time duck the blows from the axe. He stepped to one side, tripped in the folds of the cloak, and fell. Above, the axeman snorted and raised the axe for the final blow. Hawkmoon rolled just in time as the axe came down and sheared through the cloth of his gown. He leapt up as he tugged the axe from the hard wood of the floor and swung his sword round to clang against the back of the axeman's neck. The man groaned and fell, dazed, to his knees. Hawkmoon kicked back the mask, revealing a red, twisted face, and stabbed into the gaping mouth, driving the sword deep into the throat, so that the jugular was cut and blood shot from the helm. Hawkmoon withdrew his blade, and the helm clanged shut. Nearby, Oladan was struggling, half off his man, who had now got a grip on his arm and was tugging him away from his neck. Hawkmoon jumped forward, and with both hands drove his sword into the man's belly, piercing armour, leather underjerkin, and flesh. The man screamed and crumpled to the floor, to lie there writhing. Then together Oladan and Hawkmoon took Daverk's man from behind, both swords slashing at him, until he too lay dead on the floor. There was nothing left but to finish off the handless man, who lay propped against the bench, weeping and trying to stick his hand back on. Panting, Hawkmoon looked about the tavern room at the carnage they had wrought. "Not a bad night's work for holy men," he said. Daverk looked thoughtful. "Maybe," he said softly, It is time to change our disguise to a more useful one. What do you mean? There are enough pieces of Boer armour here to furnish all four of us, particularly since I still have mine. I speak the secret language of the Order of the Boar. With luck we could travel disguised as those we fear most, as Dark Empire men. We have been wondering how to get through the countries where Gran Bretagne has consolidated her gains. Well, here's our way. Hawkmoon thought deeply. Daberk's suggestion was a wild one, but it had possibilities, particularly since Daberk himself knew all the rituals of the Order. "Aye," said Hawkmoon, "perhaps you're right, Daberk. We could then go where the Dark Empire forces are thickest, and stand a chance of getting to the Camargue faster. Very well, we'll do it." They began stripping the armour from the corpses. "We can be sure of the landlords and townspeople's silence," said Daberk, "for they'll not want it known that 6 Dark Empire warriors were killed here." Oladan watched them work, nursing his twisted arm. "A pity," he said with a sigh. "It was an exploit that should be recorded."
Chapter 8. The Dark Empire Camp.
Sure, just end right there.
"Brood of the mountain giants, I'll stifle to death before we've gone a mile." The muffled voice of Oladan came from within the grotesque helmet as he tried to tug himself free of its engulfing weight. They sat all four in their room above the tavern, trying on the captured armour. Hawkmoon, too, was finding the stuff uncomfortable. Apart from the fact that it did not fit him properly, it made him feel distinctly claustrophobic. He had worn something like it some time before, when disguised in the wolf armour of Baron Miliadus's order. But if anything, the boar armour was even heavier, and far less comfortable. It must be that much worse for Iselda. Only Daberk was used to it, and had donned his own, to look with some relish and amusement at their first encounter with the uniform of his order. "No wonder you claim ill health," Hawkmoon told him. "I know of nothing less healthy. I'm tempted to forget the whole plan." "You'll become more used to it as we ride," Daberk assured him. "A little chafing, a little stuffiness, then you'll find you'll feel naked without it." "I'd rather be naked," Olderhan protested, yanking off the leering boar mask at last. It fell with a clatter to the floor. "Careful with it," Daberk wagged a finger. "We don't want to damage any more." Olderhan gave the helmet an extra kick. A day and a night later, they were riding deep into Shekia. There was no doubt that the Dark Empire had conquered the province, for towns and villages were everywhere laid waste. Crucified corpses hung along every road. Carrion birds were thick in the air, and even thicker on the ground where they feasted. The night had been as light as if the sun were permanently on the horizon, lit by the funeral pyres of villages, farms, towns, villas and cities, and the black hordes of the island empire of Gran Bretagne, brands in one hand, swords in the other, rode like demons from hell, howling and shrieking across the broken land. Survivors hid, cringing from the fore as they rode in disguise through this world of terror, galloping as fast as they could, for none suspected them. They were just one small pack of murderers and looters among many, and neither friend nor foe had any suspicion of their real identities. Now it was morning, a morning overcast with black smoke, warmed by distant fires, a morning of ash-covered fields and trampled crops, of broken flowers and bloody corpses, a morning like any other morning in a land under the heel of Gran Bretagne. Along the churned mud of the road, a group of riders came toward them, swathed in great canvas night-cloaks that covered their bemasked heads as well as their bodies. They rode powerful black horses and were hunched in their saddles as if they had been riding for many days. As they drew close, Hawkmoon murmured, "Dark Empire men for certain, and they seem to be taking an interest in us." The leader pushed back his canvas cowl and revealed a huge boar mask, larger and more ornate than even Daberk's. He reined in his black stallion, and his men came to a halt behind him. "Silence all three," murmured Daberk, leading them up to the waiting warriors. I'll speak. Now from the leader of the Boer warriors came a peculiar snorting, snuffling and whining voice that must be speaking, thought Hawkmoon, the secret language of the Order of the Boar. He was surprised to hear similar sounds begin to issue from Daberk's throat. The conversation continued for some time, Daberk pointing back down the road, the Boer leader jerking his helm mask in the other direction. Then the leader urged his horse on, and he and his men filed past the nervous three and continued on up the road. What did he want? Hawkmoon asked. Wanted to know if we'd seen any livestock. They're a foraging party of some sort, out to locate provisions for the camp ahead. What camp's that? A big one, he said, about 4 miles further on. They're getting ready to attack one of the last cities still standing against them, Brandichla. I know the place. It had beautiful architecture. Then we are close to Oosterland, Giselda said. And beyond Oosterland lies Italia, and beyond Italia, Provence, home. True, said Daberk. Your geography is excellent, but we are not home yet, and the most dangerous part of the journey has still to be encountered. What shall we do about this camp? Oledan said. Skirt it or try to ride through it? It's a vast camp, Daberk told him. Our best chance would be to go through the middle, possibly even spend the night in it and try to learn something of the Dark Empire's plans, whether they have heard we are nearby, for instance. Hawkmoon's muffled voice came from the helmet. I'm not sure it is not too dangerous, he said doubtfully. Yet, if we try to skirt the camp, we might arouse suspicion. Very well, we go through it. Will we not have to remove our masks, Dorian? Iselda asked him. No fear of that, Daberk said. The native Grand Britannian often sleeps in his mask, hates to reveal his face. Hawkmoon had noticed the weariness in Iselda's voice and knew that they must rest soon. It would have to be in the Grand Britannian camp. They had expected the camp to be huge, but not as vast as this. In the distance beyond it was the walled city of Brandichla, its spires and facades visible even from here. They are remarkably beautiful, said Daberk with a sigh. He shook his head. What a pity they must fall tomorrow. They were fools to resist this army. It is of incredible size, said Oledan. Surely unnecessary to defeat that town. The Dark Empire aims at speed of conquest, Hawkmoon told him. I have seen larger armies than this used on smaller cities, but the camp covers a great distance and organization will not be perfect. I think we can hide here. There were canopies, tents, even huts built here and there, cooking fires on which food of all descriptions was being prepared, and corrals for horses, bullocks and mules. Slaves hauled great war machines through the mud of the camp, goaded on by men of the Order of the Ant. Banners fluttered in the breeze, and the standards of a score of military orders were stuck here and there in the ground. From a distance it seemed like some primeval concourse of beasts, as a line of wolves tramped across a ruined field, or a gathering of moles, one of the engineering orders, groaned about a cooking fire, while elsewhere could be seen wasps, ravens, ferrets, rats, foxes, tigers, boars, flies, hounds, badgers, goats, wolverines, otters, and even a few mantises, select guards whose Grand Constable was King Huon himself. Hawkmoon himself recognized several of the banners, that of Adas Promp, fat Grand Constable of the Order of the Hound, Brainal Farnoo's ornate flag showing him to be a Baron of Gran Bretagne, and the Rat's Grand Constable, the fluttering standard of Shenigar Trot, Count of Sussex. Hawkmoon guessed that this city must be the last to fall in a sustained campaign, and that was why the army was so large and attended by so many high-ranking warlords. He made out Shenigar Trot himself, being borne in a horse litter toward his tent, his robes covered in jewels, his pale silver mask wrought in the parody of a human face. Shenegar Trott seemed like a soft-living, soft-brained aristocrat, ruined by rich living. But Hawkmoon had seen Shenegar Trott do battle at the ford of Weitzner on the Rhine, had seen him deliberately sink himself and horse under water, and ride along the river bottom to emerge on the enemy's bank. It was the puzzling thing about all Dark Empire noblemen. They seemed soft, lazy, and self-indulgent, yet they were as strong as the beasts they pretended to be, and were often braver. Shenegar Trott was also the man who had hacked off the limb of a screaming child and eaten a bite from it while its mother was forced to watch.
Exactly what I wanted.
Well, said Hawkmoon, taking a deep breath, let's ride through the camp as near to the far side as we can. I hope we'll be able to slip away in the morning. They rode slowly through the camp. From time to time a boar would greet them, and Daverk would answer for them. Eventually they came to the farthest edge of the camp and dismounted. They had brought the gear stolen from the men they had killed in the tavern, and now they set it up without suspicion, for it bore no special insignia. Daverk watched the others work. It would not do, he had told them, for one of his obvious ranks to be seen helping his men. A group of engineers of the Badger order came tramping around with a cartload of spare axe heads, sword pommels, arrowheads, spear tips, and the like. They also had a sharpening machine. "Any work for us, brother boars?" they grunted, pausing beside the little camp. Hawkmoon boldly drew his blunted blade. "This needs sharpening." "Aye, and I've lost a bow and a quiver of arrows," Oladan said, eyeing a batch of bows in the bottom of the cart. "What about your mate?" said the man in the badger mask. "He's got no sword at all." He indicated Iselda. "Then give him one, fool," barked Daverk in his most lordly tone, and the badger hastily obeyed. When they had been re-equipped and had their weapons freshly sharpened, Hawkmoon felt his confidence come back. He was pleased at the coolness of his deception. Only Iselda seemed downhearted. She hefted the great sword she had been forced to strap around her waist. "Much more weight," she said, "and I'll fall to my knees." "Best get inside the tent," Hawkmoon said. "There you'll be able to take off some of the gear at least." Daverk seemed unsettled, watching Hawkmoon and Olderhand prepare a cooking fire. "What ails you, Daverk?" Hawkmoon asked, looking up and peering through the eye-slits of his helmet. "Sit down, the food will not be long." "I smell something wrong," Daverk murmured. "I am not altogether happy that we are in no danger." "Why, do you think the badgers suspected us?" "Not at all." Daverk looked across the camp. Evening darkened the sky, and the warriors were beginning to settle down. There was less movement now. On the walls of the distant city, soldiers lined the battlements, ready to resist an army that none had resisted to date, save for the Camargue. "Not at all," Daverk repeated, half to himself. "But I would feel relieved if—" "If what?" "I think I will walk about the camp a little, see what gossip I can hear." "Is that wise? Besides, if we are approached by others of the Boer order, we'll not be able to speak the language." "I'll not be gone long. Get into your tents as soon as you can." Hawkmoon wanted to stop Daverk, but he did not know how to without attracting unwanted attention. He watched Daverk stride off through the camp. Just then a voice said from behind him, "A nice-looking piece of sausage you have there, brothers." Hawkmoon turned. It was a warrior in the mask of the Order of the Wolf. "Aye," said Oladan quickly. "Aye, will you have a piece, brother?" He cut a slice of sausage and handed it to the man in the wolf mask. The warrior turned, lifted his mask, popped the food into his mouth, lowered his mask quickly, and turned back again. "Thanks," he said. "I've been travelling for days on next to nothing. Our commander drives you hard. We just came in, riding faster than a flying Frenchman." He laughed. "All the way from Provence." "From Provence?" Hawkmoon said involuntarily. "Aye, been there?" "Once or twice. Have we won the Camargue yet?" "As good as. Commander thinks it's a matter of days. They're virtually leaderless, running out of provisions. Those weapons they've got have killed 1 million of us, but they won't kill many more before we ride over them. What happened to Count Brass, their leader? Dead, I heard, or as good as. Their morale's getting worse every day. By the time we get back, I should think it'll be all over. I'll be glad. I've been pitched there for months. This is the first change of scenery since we began the damned campaign. Thanks for the sausage, brothers. Good killing tomorrow. Hawkmoon watched the wolf warriors stamp away into the night that was now lit by 1,000 campfires. He sighed and entered the tent. "You heard that?" he asked Isolde. "I heard." She had removed her helmet and greaves and was combing her hair. "It seems my father still lives." She spoke in an over-controlled tone, and Hawkmoon, even in the darkness of the tent, could see tears in her eyes. He took her face in his hands and said, "Do not fear, Isolde. A few days more and we shall be at his side. If he lives that long, he awaits us. He will live." Later, Hawkmoon went outside. Oledan sat by the dying fire, arms around his knees. "Daverk has been gone too long," said Oledan. "Aye," said Hawkmoon distantly, staring at the faraway walls of the city. "Has he come to harm, I wonder?" "Deserted us, more likely." Oledan broke off as several figures emerged from the shadows. Hawkmoon saw with sinking heart that they were boar-masked warriors. "Into your tent quickly," he murmured to Oledan. But it was too late. One of the boars was already talking to Hawkmoon, addressing him in the guttural secret tongue of the order. Hawkmoon nodded and raised a hand as if acknowledging a greeting, hoping that that was all it was. But the boar's tone became more insistent. Hawkmoon tried to enter his tent, but an arm restrained him. Again the boar spoke to him. Hawkmoon coughed, pretending illness, pointing at his throat. But then the boar said, "I asked you, brother, if you'd drink with us. Take off that mask." Hawkmoon knew that no member of any order would demand of another that he remove his mask, unless he suspected him of wearing it illicitly. He stepped back and drew his sword. "I regret I should not like to drink with you, brother, but I'll happily fight with you."
Just a second.
Oledan sprang up beside him, his own sword ready. "Who are you?" growled the boar. "Why wear the armour of another order? What sense does that make?" Hawkmoon flung back his helm, revealing his pale face and the black jewel that shone there. "I am Hawkmoon," he said simply, and leapt forward into the mass of astonished warriors. The pair took the lives of 5 of the Dark Empire men before the noise of the fight brought others running from all over the camp. Riders galloped up. All around him Hawkmoon was aware of shouts and the babble of voices. His arm rose and fell in the darkness of the press, but soon it was gripped by a dozen hands, and he felt himself borne down. A spear haft caught him a buffet in the back of his neck, and he fell into the mud of the field. Dazed, he was dragged upright and hauled before a tall, black-armoured figure seated on a horse some distance away from the main mass. His mask was lifted back, and he peered up at the horseman. "Ah, this is pleasant, Duke of Curlin," came the deep, musical voice from within the horseman's helm, a voice edged with evil and with malice, a voice Hawkmoon recognized dimly, but could not believe in his recognition. "My long journey has not been wasted," said the horseman, turning to his mounted companion. "I am glad, my lord," was the reply. "I trust I am now reinstated in the eyes of the King Emperor." Hawkmoon's head jerked up to look at the other man. His eyes blazed as he recognized the elaborate mask helm of Daverk. Thickly, Hawkmoon cried, "So you have betrayed us. Another betrayal. Are all men traitors to Hawkmoon's cause?" He tried to break free, to grab with his hands at Daverk, but the warriors held him back. Daverk laughed. "You are naive, Duke Dorian." He began to cough weakly. "Have you got the others?" the horseman asked. "The girl and the little beast-man?" "Aye, your excellency," answered one of the men. "Then bring them to my camp. I want to inspect them all closely. This is a very satisfying day for me.
Chapter 9. The Journey South.
A storm had begun to rumble over the camp as Hawkmoon, Oladan and Iselda were dragged through the mud and the filth, past the bright, curious eyes of the warriors, through the noise and confusion, to where a great banner fluttered in the newly come wind. Lightning suddenly split a jagged gulf in the sky, and thunder growled, then exploded. More lightning came, fast on the thunder's heels, illuminating the scene before them. Hawkmoon gasped as he recognized the banner, tried to speak to Oladan or Iselda, but was then bundled into a large pavilion where a masked man sat on a carved chair, Taverk standing beside him. The man in the chair wore the mask of the Order of the Wolf. The banner had proclaimed him Grand Constable of that order, one of the greatest nobles in all Gran Bretagne, first chieftain of the armies of the Dark Empire under the King Emperor Huon, a Baron of Croydon. A man Hawkmoon thought dead, was sure he had slain him himself. "Baron Meliadus," he grunted, "you did not die at Hamadan." "No, I did not die, Hawkmoon, though you wounded me sorely. I escaped that battlefield." Hawkmoon smiled thinly. "Few of your men did. We defeated you, routed you." Meliadus turned his ornate wolf mask and spoke to a captain who stood nearby. "Bring chains, bring many chains, strong and of great weight. Heap them on these dogs and rivet them. I want no locks that might be picked. This time I will be sure they are brought to Gran Bretagne." He left his chair and descended, to peer through the eye-slits in his mask at Hawkmoon's face. "They have discussed you often at King Huon's court, have devised such exquisite, such elaborate, such splendid punishments for you, traitor. Your dying will take a year or two, and each moment will be agony of mind, spirit, and body. All our ingenuity, Hawkmoon, we have squandered on you." He stepped back and reached out a black gauntlet to cup Iselda's hate-twisted face. She turned her head, eyes filled with anger and despair. "And as for you, I offered you all honours to become my wife. Now you will have no honour, but a husband I shall be to you until I tire of you or your body breaks." The wolf head moved slowly to regard Oladan. "And as for this creature, unhuman, yet upstart enough to walk on two legs, he shall crawl and whine like the animal he is, be trained to behave like a proper beast."
This as fast as it goes.
Oladan spat at the jewelled mask. "I'll have an excellent model in you," he said. Meliadus whirled, cloak swirling, and limped heavily back to his chair. "I'll save all until we presented ourselves at the throne globe," Meliadus said, his voice slightly unsteady. "I've been patient, and will remain so for a few more days. We move off at first light, returning to Gran Bretagne, but we shall take a slight detour, in order that you may witness the final destruction of the Camargue. I have been there for a month, you know, and watched its men die daily, watched the towers fall one by one. There are not many left. I have told them to hold off the last assault until I return. I thought you would like to see your homeland raped." He laughed, putting his grotesquely masked head on one side to look at them again. "Ah, here are the chains." Members of the Order of the Badger were coming in, bearing huge iron chains, a brazier, hammers and rivets. Hawkmoon, Iselda and Oladan struggled as the Badgers bound them, but soon they were forced down to the floor by the weight of the iron links. Then the red-hot rivet nails were hammered home, and Hawkmoon knew that no human being could possibly hope to escape such bonds. Baron Meliadus came to look down at him when the work was done. "We'll journey by land to the Camargue, and from there to Bordeaux, where a ship will be waiting for us. I regret I cannot offer you a flying machine. We are using most of them to level the Camargue." Hawkmoon closed his eyes, the only gesture he could make to display his contempt for his captor. Bundled into an open wagon the next morning, The three were given no food before Baron Meliadus's heavily guarded caravan set off. From time to time, Hawkmoon caught a glimpse of his enemy, riding near the head of the column with Sir William d'Averc by his side. The weather was still stormy and oppressive, and a few heavy drops of rain splashed on Hawkmoon's face and fell into his eyes. He was so heavily bound that he could barely shake his head to rid it of the moisture. The wagon bumped and jerked away, and in the distance the Dark Empire troops were marching against the city. It seemed to Hawkmoon that he had been betrayed on all sides. He had trusted the warrior in jet and gold, and had had his saddlebags stolen. He had trusted d'Averc and found himself delivered into the hands of Baron Meliadus. Now he sighed, not sure that even Oladan would not betray him, given the opportunity. He found himself slipping almost comfortably into the mood that had possessed him months before, after his defeat and capture by Gran Bretagne, when he had led an army against Baron Meliadus in Germany. His face became frozen, his eyes dull, and he ceased to think. Sometimes Iselda would speak, and he would answer with an effort, having no words of comfort, because he knew that there were none that would convince her. Sometimes Oladan would try to make a cheerful comment, but the others did not reply, and eventually he too lapsed into silence. Only when, from time to time, food was pushed into their mouths did they show any signs of life. So the days passed as the caravan trundled southward towards the Camargue. They had all anticipated this homecoming for months, but now they looked forward to it without joy. Hawkmoon knew he had failed in his chosen mission, failed to save the Camargue, and he was full of self-contempt. Soon they were passing through Italia, and Baron Meliadus called out one day, "The Camargue we'll reach before a couple of nights have passed. We're just crossing the border into France." And he laughed.
Chapter 10. The Fall of the Camargue.
I have yet to find a man that can outsmart a bullet.
"Sit them up," said Baron Meliadus, "so they can see." On horseback, he leaned over to look into the wagon. "Get them up straight," he told his sweating men, who were wrestling with the three bodies, still clad in armour and made heavier by the great weight of chains about them. "They do not look well," he added, "and I thought them such hardy spirits." d'Averc rode up beside Baron Meliadus, coughing, hunched a little in his saddle. "And you're still in poor condition, d'Averc. Did not my apothecary mix you the medicine you asked for?" "He did, my Lord Baron," d'Averc said weakly, "but it does me little good." "It should have done.
I have yet
the
to
mixture
find a
of
man
herbs you had him
that can
put in."
outsmart a bullet.
Meliadus returned his attention to the three prisoners. "See, we have stopped on this hill so that you can look at your homeland." Hawkmoon blinked in the midday sunlight, recognizing the marshlands of his beloved Camargue stretching and shining away to the horizon. But closer he saw the great sombre watchtowers of the Camargue, the strength of the Camargue with their strange weapons of incredible power, whose secrets were known only to Count Brass. And camped near them a black mass of men, like so many million ants ready to sweep in, were the gathered forces of the Dark Empire. "Oh," sobbed Iselda, "they can never withstand so many." "An intelligent estimate, my dear," said Baron Meliadus. "You are quite right." He and his party had come to a rest on the slopes of a hill that led gradually down to the plain where the troops of Gran Bretagne massed. Hawkmoon could see infantry, cavalry, engineers, rank upon rank of them. He saw war engines of enormous size, huge flame cannon, ornithopters flapping through the skies in such numbers that they blotted out the sun as they passed over the heads of the onlookers. All manner of metal had been brought against the peaceful Camargue, brass and iron and bronze and steel, tough alloys that could resist the bite of the flame lance, gold and silver and platinum and lead. Vultures marched beside frogs, and horses beside moles. There were wolves and boars and stags and wildcats, eagles and ravens and badgers and weasels. Silk banners fluttered in the moist, warm air, bright with the colours of 200 of nobles from all corners of Grand Bretagne. There were yellows and purples and blacks and reds, blues and greens and flashing pink, and the sun caught the jewels of 100,000 eyes and made them flash, malevolent and grim. "Ah," laughed Baron Meliadus, "that army I command. If Count Brass had not refused to aid us that day, you would all be honoured allies of the Dark Empire of Grand Bretagne. But because you resisted us, you will be punished. You thought your weapons and your towers and the stoic bravery of your men were enough to stand against the might of Grand Bretagne. Not enough, Dorian Hawkmoon, not enough. See, my army, raised by me to commit my vengeance. See, Hawkmoon, and know what a fool you and the rest were." He flung back his head and laughed for a long time. "Tremble, Hawkmoon, and you too, Iselda, tremble as your fellows are trembling now within their towers, for they know those towers must fall. They know the Camargue will be ashes and mud before tomorrow's sunset. I will destroy the Camargue if it means sacrificing my entire army." And Hawkmoon and Iselda did tremble, though it was with grief at the threat of the destruction foreseen by mad Baron Meliadus. "Count Brass is dead," said Baron Meliadus, turning his horse to ride to the head of his company, "and now dies the Camargue." He waved his arm. "Forward! Let me see the carnage." The waggon began to move again, bumping down the hill road to the plain, its prisoners propped in it with stricken faces and miserable eyes. Daverk continued to ride beside the waggon, coughing ostentatiously. "The Baron's medicine's not bad," he said at length. "It should cure the ills of all his men." And with that enigmatic pronouncement he urged his horse into a gallop to reach the head of the column and ride beside his master. Hawkmoon saw strange rays flash from the towers of the Camargue and strike into the gathered ranks that came against them, leaving scars of smoking ground where men had been. He saw the cavalry of the Camargue begin to move up to take its positions, a thin line of battered guardians riding their horned horses, flame lances on their shoulders. He saw ordinary townsfolk from the settlements, armed with swords and axes, coming in the wake of the cavalry. But he did not see Count Brass, he did not see von Villach, and he did not see the philosopher Beaugentle. The men of the Camargue marched leaderless to this last battle. He heard the faint sounds of their battle shouts coming over the howls and roars of the attackers, the crack of cannon and the shriek of flame lancers, heard the clatter of armour and the creak of metal, smelled beast and man and weapon marching through the mud. And then he saw the black hordes pause as a wall of fire rose into the air before them, and scarlet flamingos flew over it, riders aiming flame lances at the clanking ornithopters. Hawkmoon ached to be free, to have the feel of a sword in his hand and a horse between his legs, to rally the men of the Camargue, who, even leaderless, could still resist the Dark Empire, though their numbers were a fraction of the enemy's. He writhed in his chains, and he cursed in his fury and frustration. Evening came, and the battle went on. Hawkmoon saw an ancient black tower struck by 1,000,000 flames from the Dark Empire cannon, saw it sway, topple and fall, crashing down to become rubble suddenly, and the black hordes cheered. Night fell and the battle went on. The heat of it reached even to the three in the waggon and brought sweat to their faces. Around them the wolf guards sat laughing and talking, certain of victory. Their master had ridden his horse into the thick of his troops, the better to see how the battle went, and they brought out a skin of wine, with long straws jutting from it, so that they could suck the stuff through their masks. As the night grew longer, their talk and their laughter subsided until, strangely, they all slept. Oladan remarked on it. Not like the vigilant wolves to sleep so hard, they must be confident. Hawkmoon sighed. Aye, but it does us no good. These damned chains are riveted so fast that we have no hope of escaping. What's this? The voice was Daberk's. No longer optimistic, Hawkmoon? I found it hard to believe. Away with you, Daberk, Hawkmoon said as the man emerged from the darkness to stand beside the wagon. Back to lick the boots of your master. I had brought this, Daberk said in a mock-aggrieved tone, to see if it would serve you. He displayed a bulky object in his hand. After all, it was my medicine that drugged the guards. Hawkmoon's eyes narrowed. What's that in your hand? A rarity I found on the battleground. Some great commanders, I'd judge, for there are few of them to be found these days. It's a kind of flame lance, though small enough to be carried in one hand. I've heard of them, Hawkmoon nodded, but what use is it to me? I'm in chains, as you see. Aye, I noted that. If you take a risk, however, it might be that I could release you. Is this a new trap, Daberk, that you and Meliadus have concocted between you? I'm hurt, Hawkmoon. Why should you think that? Because you betrayed us into Meliadus's hands. You must have prepared the trap well ahead when you spoke to those wolf warriors in that Carpathian village. You sent them to find their master and arranged to lead us to that camp where we could most easily be captured. Why, it sounds possible, agreed Daberk, though you could see it another way. The wolf warriors recognized me then and followed us, going later to warn their master. I heard the rumour at the camp that Meliadus had come to find you, decided to tell Meliadus I had led you into this trap, so that one of us would be free at least. Daberk paused. How does that sound? Glib. Well, yes, it does sound glib. Now, Hawkmoon, there is not much time. Shall I see if I can burn your chains without burning you, or would you rather keep your seats for fear of missing a development in the battle? Burn the damned chains, Hawkmoon said, for at least with my hands free I'll have a chance to choke you if you lie. Daberk brought the little flame lance up and directed it at an angle to Hawkmoon's fettered arms. Then he touched a stud, and a beam of intense heat sprang from the nozzle. Hawkmoon felt pain sear his arm, but he gritted his teeth. The pain got worse until he felt he must cry out, and then there was a clatter as one of the links fell to the bottom of the wagon, and he felt some of the weight leave him. An arm was free, his right arm. He rubbed it and almost yelled as he touched a part where the armour had been burned clean through. Hurry, murmured Daberk. Here, hold up another length of chain. It will be easier now. At last Hawkmoon was free of the chain, and they set about releasing Iselda and then Oladan. Daberk was becoming noticeably more nervous by the time they had finished. I have your swords here, he said, and new masks and horses. You must follow me, and hurry before Meliadus comes back. I had, to tell you the truth, expected him before now. They crept through the darkness to where the horses were tethered, donned the masks, strapped the swords to their waists, and climbed into their saddles. Then they heard other steeds galloping up the hill road toward them, heard confused shouts and an angry bellow that could only be Meliadus's. Quick, Daberk hissed. We must ride for the Camargue. They kicked their horses into a wild gallop and began to career down the hill toward the main battlefield.
But I'm better.
Make way, Daberk screamed. Make way. The force must move through. Reinforcements for the front. Men leapt aside for their horses as they thundered through the thick of the camp, cursing the four figures who rode so heedlessly. Make way, Daberk yelled. A message for the Grand Commander. He found time to turn his head and called to Hawkmoon. It bores me to sustain the same life, he yelled again. Make way, the potion for the plague-struck. Behind them they heard other horses as Meliadus and his men came in pursuit. Ahead they could now see that the fighting still continued, but not with the intensity it had had earlier. Make way, bellowed Daberk. Make way for Baron Meliadus. The horses leapt knots of men, swept around war engines, galloped through fires, drawing nearer and nearer to the Camargue's towers, while behind them they could hear Meliadus yelling. Now they reached a point where the horses galloped over corpses, the fallen of Gran Bretagne, and the main force was now behind them. Get the masks off, Daberk called. It's our only chance. If the Camargians recognize you and Iselda in time, they'll hold their fire. If not... From out of the darkness came the bright beam of a flame lance, narrowly missing Daverk. Behind him other flame lancers shot their searing death, aimed doubtless by Meliadus' men. Hawkmoon grappled with the straps of his mask helm, managed at last to unloose it and fling it behind him. "Stop!" The voice was Meliadus's, gaining on them now. "You'll perish by your own forces, fools!" More flame lancers had opened up from the Camargue side, illuminating the night with ruddy light. The horses rode over the dead, finding it hard going. Daverk had his head down over his horse's neck, and Iselda and Oladan were crouching low too. But Hawkmoon drew his sword and yelled, "Men of the Camargue, it is Hawkmoon! Hawkmoon has returned!" The flame lancers did not cease, but they were getting closer and closer to one of the towers now. Daverk straightened in his saddle. "Camargians, I bring you Hawkmoon, who will—" And fire splashed him. He flung up his arms, cried out, and began to topple from his saddle. Hawkmoon hastily drew alongside, steadying the body. The armour was red-hot, melted in places, but Daverk seemed not wholly dead. A faint laugh came from the blistered lips. "A piece of serious misjudgment, linking my fortunes with yours, Hawkmoon." The other two came to a halt, their horses stamping in confusion. Behind them Baron Meliadus and his men drew closer. "Take the reins of his horse, Oladan," Hawkmoon said. "I'll steady him in his saddle, and we'll see if we can get closer to the tower." Flame shot out again, this time from the Grand Britannian side. "Stop, Hawkmoon!" Hawkmoon ignored the command and moved on, slowly picking his way through the mud and death all around him, trying to support Daverk. Hawkmoon shouted as a great beam of light sprang from the tower. "Men of the Camargue, it is Hawkmoon and Iselda, Count Brass's daughter." The light faded. Closer now came the horses of Meliadus. Iselda, too, was swaying in her saddle from exhaustion. Hawkmoon prepared to meet the wolves of Meliadus. Then, bursting down an incline, streamed a score of armoured guardians, the white, horned horses of the Camargue under them, and they surrounded the four. One of the guardians peered close into Hawkmoon's face, then his eyes lit with joy. "It is my lord Hawkmoon! It is Iselda! Ah, now our luck will change!" Some distance away, Meliadus and his men had paused when they saw the Camargians. Then they turned and rode into the darkness. They came to Castle Brass in the morning, when the pale sunlight fell on the lagoons, and the wild bulls looked up from where they drank and watched them pass. A wind stirred the reeds, making them roll like the sea, and the hill overlooking the town was rich with grapes and other fruits just beginning to ripen. On top of the hill stood Castle Brass, solid and old, and seemingly unchanged by the wars that had raged on the borders of the province it protected. They rode up the curling white road to the castle, crossed into the courtyard, where joyous stewards rushed out to take their horses, then entered the hall, which was full of Count Brass's trophies. It was strangely cold and silent, and a single figure stood by the great fireplace waiting for them. Although he smiled, his eyes were fearful, and his face had aged much since Hawkmoon had last seen him. Wise Sir Beaugentle, the philosopher Point. Beaugentle embraced Iselda, then gripped Hawkmoon's hand. "How is Count Brass?" Hawkmoon asked. "Physically well, but he has lost the will to live." Beaugentle signed for stewards to help Daverk. "Take him to the room in the northern tower, the sick room. I'll attend to him as soon as I can." "Come," he said, "see for yourselves." They left Oladan to stay with Daverk, and climbed the old stone staircase to the landing, where Count Brass's apartments still were. Beaugentle opened a door, and they entered the bedroom. There was a simple soldier's bed, big and square, with white sheets and plain pillows. On the pillows lay a great head that seemed carved from metal. The red hair had a little more grey, the bronze face was a trifle paler, but the red moustache was the same. and the heavy brow that hung like a ledge of rock over the cave of the deep-set golden brown eyes, that too was the same. But the eyes stared at the ceiling without blinking, and the lips did not move, were set in a hard line. "Count Brass," murmured Bowgentle, "look." But the eyes remained fixed. Hawkmoon had to come forward, peer straight into the face, and make Iselda do likewise. "Count Brass, your daughter Iselda has returned, and Dorian Hawkmoon too." From the lips now came a rumbling murmur. "More illusions. I thought the fever past, Bowgentle." "So it is, my lord. These are not phantoms." The eyes moved now to look at them. "Am I dead at last, and joined with you, my children?" "You are on earth, Count Brass," Hawkmoon said. Iselda bent and kissed her father on the lips. "There, father, an earthly kiss." Gradually the hard line of the lips began to melt, until a smile was there, then a wide grin. Then the body heaved under the clothes, and suddenly Count Brass was sitting upright. "Ah, it's true. I'd lost hope. Fool that I am, I'd lost hope." He laughed now, suddenly alive with vitality. Bowgentle was astonished. "Count Brass, I thought you but a pace from the door of death." "So I was, Bowgentle, but I've leapt back from it, as you see, leapt a long way. How goes the siege, Hawkmoon?" "Badly for us, Count Brass, but better, I'll wager, now we three are together again." "Aye, Bowgentle, have my armour brought, and where is my sword?" "Count Brass, you must still be weak." "Then bring me food, a great deal of food, and I'll fortify myself as we talk." And Count Brass sprang from his bed to embrace his daughter and her betrothed. In the hall they ate, while Dorian Hawkmoon told Count Brass all that had befallen him since leaving the castle so many months before. Count Brass, in turn, told of his tribulations with, it had seemed, the entire might of the Dark Empire to contend with. He told of Von Villach's last battle, and how the old man had died bravely, at the cost of a score of Dark Empire lives, how he himself had been wounded, how he had learned of Iselda's disappearance and lost the will to live. Oladan came down then and was introduced. He said that Daberk was badly hurt, but that Bowgentle thought he would recover. On the whole, it was a cheerful homecoming, but marred by the knowledge that on the borders the Guardians were fighting for their lives, almost certainly fighting a losing battle. Count Brass had by this time donned his armour of brass and strapped on his huge broadsword. He towered above the others as he stood up and said, "Come, Hawkmoon, Sir Oladan, we must to the battlefield and lead our men to victory." Bowgentle sighed. 2 hours ago I thought you all but dead. Now you ride to battle. You are not well enough, sir." "My sickness was of the spirit, not the flesh, and that's cured now," roared Count Brass. "Horses! Tell them to bring our horses, Sir Bowgentle." Though himself weary, Hawkmoon found renewed vigour as he followed the old man from the castle. He blew a kiss to Iselda, and then they were in the courtyard, mounting the horses that would bear them to the battlefield. They rode hard, the three of them, through the secret pathways of the marshlands, with huge clouds of giant flamingos passing through the air over their heads, herds of wild horned horses galloping away from them. Count Brass waved a gloved hand. "Such a land is worth defending with all we have. Such peace is worth protecting." Soon they heard the sounds of warfare and came to where the Dark Empire drove against the towers. They reined in when they saw the worst. Count Brass spoke in a stricken whisper. "Impossible," he said. But it was true. The towers had fallen. Each lay broken, a pile of smoking masonry. The survivors were even now being pressed back, though they battled bravely. "This is the fall of the Camargue," said Count Brass in the voice of an old man.
Chapter 11. Return of the Warrior.
Now one of the captains saw them and came riding up. His armour was in tatters and his sword broken, but there was joy in his face. "Count Brass, at last! Come, sir, we must rally the men, drive the Dark Empire dogs away." Hawkmoon saw Count Brass force himself to smile, draw his great broadsword and say, "Aye, Captain, see if you can find a herald or two to tell all that Count Brass is back." A cheer went up from the hard-pressed Camargians as Count Brass and Hawkmoon appeared, and they held their ground, even pushed the Grand Britannians back in places. Count Brass, with Hawkmoon and Oladan following, rode into the thick of his men, once again the invincible man of metal. "Aside, lads," he called, "aside, and let me get at the enemy." Count Brass grabbed his own battered standard from a nearby rider, and with this balanced in the crook of his arm, his sword waving, he drove forward at the mass of beast masks ahead. Hawkmoon rode up beside him, and they made a menacing, almost supernatural pair, the one in his flaming armour of brass, and the other with the black jewel embedded in his forehead, their swords rising and falling on the heads of the tightly packed Grand Britannian infantry. And when another figure joined them, a stocky man with fur covering his face and a flashing sabre striking here and there like lightning, they seemed a trio out of mythology, unnerving the beast warriors of Grand Bretagne so that they fell back. Hawkmoon searched about for Meliadus, swearing that he would certainly kill him this time, but he could not see him for the moment. Gauntleted hands tried to drag him from his saddle, but his sword slipped through eye-holes, split helms, and sliced heads from their shoulders. The day wore on, and the fighting continued without respite. Hawkmoon swayed in his saddle now, battle-weary and half-dazed with pain from a dozen minor cuts and a great many bruises. His horse was killed, but the weight of men surrounding him was so great that he sat it for half an hour before he realized it was dead. Then he sprang off it and continued fighting on foot. He knew that no matter how many he and the others killed, they were outnumbered and ill-equipped. Gradually they were being driven further and further back. "Ah," he murmured to himself, "if only we had a few hundred fresh troops, we might win the day. By the rune staff, we need aid." Suddenly a strange electric sensation ran through his body, and he gasped, recognizing what was happening to him, realizing that he had unconsciously invoked the rune staff. The red amulet, which now glowed at his neck, spreading red light on the armour of his enemies, was now transmitting power into his body. He laughed and began to hew around him with fantastic strength, cutting back the circle of warriors attacking him. His sword snapped, but he grabbed a lance from a horseman riding at him, dragged its owner from his saddle, and swinging the lance like a sword, jumped onto the horse and resumed the attack. "Hawkmoon! Hawkmoon!" he cried, using the old battle cry of his ancestors. "Hi, Oladan, Count Brass!" He gouged his way through the beast-masked warriors between himself and his friends. Count Brass's standard still swayed in its owner's hand. "Drive them back!" Hawkmoon yelled. "Drive them back to our borders!" Then Hawkmoon was everywhere, a whirling bringer of death. He raced through the ranks of Grand Bretagne, and where he passed there were only corpses. A great muttering went up from the enemy then, and they began to falter. Soon they were falling back, some actually running from the field, and then the figure of Baron Meliadus appeared, crying out to them to turn, to stand, and to fight. "Back!" he cried. "You cannot fear so few." But the tide was completely on the turn now, and he himself was caught by it, borne back by his retreating men. They fled in terror from the pale-faced knight, whose sword fell everywhere, in whose skull a black jewel shone, and at whose throat hung an amulet of scarlet fire, whose fierce horse reared over their heads. They had heard, too, that he shouted the name of a dead man, that he himself was a dead man, Dorian Hawkmoon, who had fought against them at Curlen, and almost defeated them there, who had defied the King Emperor himself, who had nearly slain Baron Meliadus, and had, in fact, defeated him more than once. Hawkmoon. It was the only name the Dark Empire feared. Hawkmoon. Hawkmoon. The figure held its sword high as its horse reared again. Hawkmoon. Possessed of the power of the Red Amulet, Hawkmoon chased the fleeing army, and he laughed wildly with a mad triumph. Behind him rode Count Brass, terrible in his red-gold armour, his huge blade dripping with the blood of his foes. Oladan grinning through his fur, bright eyes gleaming, sabre slick with gore, and behind them the jubilant forces of the Camargue, a handful of men jeering at the mighty army they had routed. Now the power of the amulet began to fade from Hawkmoon, and he felt his pains return, felt the weariness again. But now it did not matter, for they had come to the border, marked by the ruined towers, and watched their enemies in flight.
You get
Oladan laughed. Our victory, Hawkmoon. Count Brass frowned. Aye, but not one we can sustain. We must withdraw, regroup, find some safer ground to stand, for we will not beat them again in the open field.
Oh, yeah,
You're right, nodded Hawkmoon. Now that the towers have fallen, we need to find another spot well defended, and there is only one I can think of. He glanced at the Count. Aye, Castle Brass, agreed the old man. We must send word to all the towns and villages of the Camargue to tell the people to bring their goods and stock to Aiguë Mortis, under the protection of the castle. Will we be able to sustain so many for a long siege? Hawkmoon asked. We shall see, Count Brass replied, watching the distant army beginning to regroup. But at least they will have some protection when the Dark Empire troops flood over our Camargue. There were tears in his eyes as he turned his horse and began to ride back to the castle. From the balcony of his rooms in the eastern tower, Hawkmoon watched the people driving their livestock into the protection of the old town of Aiguë Morte. Most of them were corralled in the amphitheatre at one end of the town. Soldiers brought in provisions and helped folk with their loaded carts. By evening, all but a few had entered the safety of the walls, crowding into houses or camping in the streets. Hawkmoon prayed that plague or panic might not set in, for such a crowd might be hard to control. Oladan joined him on the balcony, pointing to the northeast. Look, he said, flying machines. And Hawkmoon saw the ominous shapes of Dark Empire ornithopters flapping over the horizon, a certain sign that the army of Gran Bretagne was on the move. By nightfall they could see the cooking fires of the nearest troops. Tomorrow, said Hawkmoon, it could be our last battle. They went down to the hall where Beaugentle talked to Count Brass. Food had been prepared as lavishly as ever. The two men turned as Hawkmoon and Oladan entered the hall. How is Daberk? Hawkmoon asked. Stronger, Beaugentle said. He has an excellent constitution. Says he would like to get up to eat tonight. I said he might. Isolde came through the outer door. I've spoken to the women, she said, and they say all are within the walls. We have enough provisions to last as much as a year if we slaughter the stock. Count Brass smiled sadly. It will take less than a year to decide this battle. And how is the spirit in the town? Good, she said, now that they have heard of your victory today and know you both to be alive. It is as well, Count Brass said heavily, that they do not know that tomorrow they die, or if not tomorrow, the next day. We cannot stand against such a weight of soldiers for long, my dear. Most of our flamingos are dead, so we have virtually no protection in the air. Most of our guardians are dead, and the troops we have left are all but untrained. Beaugentle sighed, and we thought the Camargue could never fall. You are too certain that it will, said a voice from the stairs, and there was Daberk, pale and dressed in a loose fawn-coloured gown, limping down to the hall. In such spirits you are bound to lose. You could try to talk of victory at least. You are right, Sir Willem. Count Brass changed his mood with an effort of will. and we could eat some of this good food here to give us energy for tomorrow's struggle." "How are you, Davert?" Hawkmoon asked as they seated themselves at the board. "Well enough," said Davert lightly. "I think I can manage some small refreshments," and he began to heap his plate with meat. They ate in silence for the most part, relishing the meal that many felt would be their last. When Hawkmoon looked from his window the next morning, it was to see the marshlands overlaid with men. In the night the Dark Empire had crept up close to their walls, and now it was readying itself for the assault. Quickly Hawkmoon donned clothes and armour, and went down to the hall where he found Davert already encased in his patched armour, Oladan cleaning his blade, and Count Brass discussing some feature of the coming campaign with two of his remaining captains. There was an atmosphere of tension in the hall, and the men spoke to one another in murmurs. Iselda appeared and called to him softly, "Dorian." He turned and ran up the stairs to the landing on which she stood, taking her in his arms and holding her close, kissing her gently on the forehead. "Dorian," she said, "let us be married before—" "Aye," he said quietly, "let us find Vogental." They found the philosopher in his quarters, reading a book. He looked up as they entered and smiled at them. They told him what they wanted, and he laid down his book. "I had hoped for the grand ceremony," he said, "but I understand." And he made them join hands and kneel before him while he spoke the words of his own composition that had always been used in marriages since he and his friend the Count had come to Count Brass. When it was done, Hawkmoon stood up and kissed Iselda again. Then he said, "Look after her, Vogental," and left the room to join his friends, who were already leaving the hall for the courtyard. As they mounted their horses, a great shadow suddenly darkened the courtyard, and they heard the creaking and clattering overhead that could only be a Dark Empire ornithopter. A bolt of flame leapt from it and splashed on the cobbles, narrowly missing Hawkmoon and causing his horse to rear, nostrils flaring and eyes rolling. Count Brass brought up the flame lance with which he had already equipped himself and touched the stud, and red fire struck upwards at the flying machine. They heard the pilot scream and saw the thing's wings cease to work. It glided out of sight, and they heard it crash at last on the side of the hill. "I must station flame lancers in the towers," Count Brass said. "They'll have the best chance of striking back at the ornithopters. Come, gentlemen, let's to the battle." And as they left the castle walls and rode down to the town, they saw the huge tide of men was already washing at the walls of the town, where Camargue warriors fought desperately to drive it back. Ornithopters, fashioned like grotesque metal birds, wheeled over the town, pouring down flame into the streets, and the air became filled with the screams of the townsfolk, the roar of flame lances, and the clash of metal against metal. Black smoke hung over Aigues-Mortes, and in places houses were already burning. Hawkmoon led the charge down to the town and pushed through frightened women and children to gain the walls and join in the fight. Elsewhere were Count Brass, Davert, and Oladan, helping to resist the force that tried to crush the town. There came a desperate roar from one portion of the wall, and an echoing cheer of triumph, and Hawkmoon began to run in that direction, seeing that a hole had been breached in the defences, and Dark Empire warriors in helms of wolf and bear were gushing through. Hawkmoon met them, and they wavered instantly, remembering his earlier exploits. He was no longer equipped with superhuman strength, but he used the pause to cry his ancestral battle shout, "Hawkmoon! Hawkmoon!" and leap at them, sword meeting metal, flesh, and bone, and driving them back through the breach. So they fought all day, holding the town even as their numbers rapidly dropped, and when the night fell and the Dark Empire troops withdrew, Hawkmoon knew, as they all knew, that the next morning must bring defeat. Wearily, Hawkmoon, Count Brass, and the others led their horses back up the winding road to the castle, their hearts heavy as they thought of all the innocents slaughtered that day, and of all the innocents who would be slaughtered tomorrow, if they were lucky enough to die. Then they heard a galloping horse behind them, and turned on the slope, swords ready, to see the strange figure of a tall rider coming up the hill toward the castle. He had a long helm that completely encased his face, and his armour was wrought all in jet and gold. Hawkmoon scowled. "What does that traitorous thief want?" he said. The warrior in jet and gold pulled up his big horse nearby. His deep, vibrant voice came from within his helmet then. "Greetings, defenders of the Camargue. I see the day goes badly for you. Baron Meliadus will defeat you tomorrow." Hawkmoon wiped his forehead with a rag. "No need to make so much of the obvious, warrior. What have you come to steal this time?" "Nothing," said the warrior. "I have come to deliver something." He reached behind him and produced Hawkmoon's battered saddlebags. Hawkmoon's spirits rose, and he leaned forward to take the saddlebags, opening one to look inside. There, wrapped in a cloak, was the object he had been given so long ago by Reinald. It was safe. He pulled back the cloak and saw the crystal unshattered. "But why did you take it in the first place?" he asked. "Let us go to Castle Brass, and there I will explain all to you," said the warrior.
I have yet to find a man.
In the hall, the warrior stood up by the fireplace, while the others sat in various positions around him, listening. "At the Mad God's castle," began the warrior, "I left you because I knew that with the aid of the Mad God's beasts you could soon be safely away from there. But I knew other hazards lay ahead of you, and suspected that you might be captured.
But I'm better.
Therefore I decided to take the object Reinald gave you and keep it safe until you should return to the Camargue."
I have yet to
"And
find
I
a
had
man
thought
that
you a
can
thief,"
outsmart a bullet.
Hawkmoon said. "I am sorry, warrior."
Hey!
"But what is the
fucked.
object?" Count Brass asked. "An ancient machine," the warrior said, "produced by one of the most sophisticated sciences ever to emerge on this earth." "A weapon?" Count Brass asked. "No, it is a device which can warp whole areas of time and space and shift them into other dimensions. While the machine exists, it can exert this power, but should it, by mischance, be destroyed, then the area it has warped falls immediately back into the time and space original to it." "And how is it operated?" Hawkmoon asked, remembering suddenly that he had no such knowledge. "It is difficult to explain, since you would recognize none of the words I would use," said the warrior in jet and gold. "But Reinald has taught me its use, among other things, and I can work it." "But for what purpose?" Daberk asked. "To shift the troublesome Baron and his men to some limbo where they will not bother us again?" "No," said the warrior. "I will explain." The door burst open, and a battered soldier rushed into the hall. "Master," he cried to Count Brass, "it is Baron Meliadus under a flag of truce. He would parley with you at the town walls." "I have nothing to say to him," Count Brass said. "He says that he intends to attack at night, that he can have the walls down within an hour, for he has fresh troops held back for the purpose. He says that if you deliver your daughter, Hawkmoon, Daberk, and yourself into his hands, he will be lenient with the rest." Count Brass thought for a moment, but Hawkmoon broke in. "It is useless to consider such a bargain, Count Brass. We both know of Meliadus' penchant for treachery. He seeks only to demoralize the folk to make his victory easier." Count Brass sighed. "But if what he says is true, and I cannot doubt that it is, he will have the walls down shortly, and we all perish." "With honour at least," said Daberk. "Aye," said Count Brass with a somewhat sardonic smile, "with honour at least." He turned to the courier. "Tell Baron Meliadus that we still do not wish to speak with him." The courier bowed. "I will, my lord." He left the hall. "We had best return to the walls," said Count Brass, rising wearily, just as Iselda entered the room. "Ah, father, Dorian, you are both safe." Hawkmoon embraced her. "But now we must go back," he said softly. "Meliadus is about to launch another attack." "Wait," said the warrior in jet and gold. "I have yet to describe my plan to you."
Chapter 12. Escape to Limbo.
Baron Meliadus smiled when he heard the courier's message. "Very well," he said to his stewards. "Let the whole town be destroyed and as many of its inhabitants taken alive to give us sport on our victory day." He turned his horse back to where his fresh troops awaited him. "Move forward," he said, and watched as they began to flow towards the doomed town and the castle beyond. He saw the fires on the town walls, the few soldiers waiting, knowing with certainty that they would die. He saw the graceful outlines of the castle that had once protected the town so well, and he chuckled. There was a warmth inside him, for he had longed for this victory ever since he had been ejected from the castle some 2 years earlier. Now his troops had nearly reached the walls, and he kicked his horse's flanks to make it move down so that he could see the battle better. Then he frowned. There seemed something wrong with the light, for the outline of town and castle had apparently wavered in a most alarming fashion. He opened his mask and rubbed his eyes, then looked again. The silhouette of Castle Brass and Aigues Mortes seemed to glow, first pink, then pale red, then scarlet, and Baron Meliadus felt light-headed. He licked his dry lips and feared for his sanity. The troops had paused in their attack, muttering to themselves and backing away from the place. The entire town and the hillside and castle it surrounded were now a flaming blue. The blue began to fade, and fading with it went Castle Brass and Aigues Mortes. A wild wind blew, knocking Baron Meliadus back in his saddle. He cried out, "Guards, what has happened?" "The place has vanished, my lord," came a nervous voice. "Vanished? Impossible! How can a whole town and a hill vanish? It is still there. They have erected some kind of screen around the place." Baron Meliadus rode wildly down to where the town walls had been, expecting to meet a barrier, but none blocked him, and his horse trampled over only mud that looked as if it had been recently ploughed. "They have escaped me," he howled. "But how? What science aids them? What power can they have that is greater than mine?" The troops had begun to turn back. Some were running. But Baron Meliadus dismounted from his horse, hands outstretched, trying to feel for the vanished town. He screamed with fury and wept with impotent rage, falling at last to his knees in the mud and shaking his fist at where Castle Brass had been. "I will find you, Hawkmoon, and your friends. I will bring all the scientific knowledge of Gran Bretagne to bear on this search, and I will follow you, if needs be, to whatever place you have escaped to, whether it be on this earth or beyond it, and you will know my vengeance. By the rune staff I swear this." And then he looked up as he heard the thump of a horse's hoofs riding past him, thought he saw a figure flash by in armour of jet and gold, thought he heard ghostly, ironic laughter, and then the rider too had vanished. Baron Meliadus rose up from his knees and looked around him for his horse. "O Hawkmoon," he said through clenched teeth, "O Hawkmoon, I will catch thee." Again he had sworn by the rune staff, as on that fateful morning 2 years before, and his action had set in motion a new pattern of history. His second oath strengthened that pattern, whether it favoured Meliadus or Hawkmoon, and hardened all their destinies a little more strongly. Baron Meliadus found his horse and returned to his camp. Tomorrow he would leave for Gran Bretagne and the labyrinthine laboratories of the Order of the Snake. Sooner or later he would be bound to find a way through to the vanished Castle Brass, he told himself. Iselda looked through the window in wonderment, her face alight with joy. Hawkmoon smiled down at her and hugged her to him. Behind them Count Brass coughed and said, "To tell you the truth, my children, I'm a little disturbed by all this science. Where did that fellow say we were?" "In some other Camargue, father," said Iselda. The view from the window was misty. Though the town and the hillside were solid enough, the rest was not. Beyond it they could see, as if through a blue radiance, shining lagoons and waving reeds, but they were of transformed colours, no longer of the simple greens and yellows, but of all the colours of the rainbow, and without the substance of the castle and its surrounds. He said we might explore it, said Hawkmoon, so it must be more tangible than it looks. Davert cleared his throat. I'll stay here and in the town, I think. What say you, Ulladan? Ulladan grinned. I think so, until I'm more used to it, at least. Well, I'm with you, said Count Ras. He laughed. Still, we're safe, eh? And our people, too. We've that to be grateful for. Aye, said Beaugentle thoughtfully, but we must not underestimate the scientific prowess of Gran Bretagne. If there is a way of following us here, they will find it, be sure of that. Hawkmoon nodded. You're right, Beaugentle. He pointed to Reinald's gift, which lay now in the centre of the empty dining table, outlined in the strange pale blue light that flooded through the windows. We must keep that in our safest vault. Remember what the warrior said. If it is destroyed, we find ourselves back again in our own space and time. Beaugentle went over to the machine and gently picked it up. I will see that it is safe, he said. When he had left, Hawkmoon turned again to look through the window, fingering the red amulet. The warrior said that he would come again with a message and a mission for me, he said. I am in no doubt now that I serve the rune staff, and when the warrior comes, I shall have to leave Castle Brass, leave this sanctuary, and return again to the world. You must be prepared for that, Yselda. Let us not speak of it now, she said, but celebrate instead our marriage. Aye, let us do that, he said with a smile. But he could not shut entirely from his mind the knowledge that somewhere, separated from him by subtle barriers, the world still existed and was still in danger from the Dark Empire. Though he appreciated the respite, the time to spend with the woman he loved, he knew that soon he must return to that world and do battle once more with the forces of Gran Bretagne.
But for the moment he would be happy.
Oh, hello, woman. That just says a little bit at the end. Are we done? We're done with that. Okay, guys, look.
Okay, so...
Shut up. I don't want to listen to you, woman. With your,
those few free souls.
Glasses. I am going to watch a show I want to watch. And, yeah, that's it. Cool. All right. Okay. Guys, look, thank you ever so much for watching if you have been watching, and go away now.